Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Présent. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brélard.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Trinité. Présent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Bouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Lehegarat.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Medic.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Balash. Monsieur le député Coles. Madame le député Foray. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf. Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Felton.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howe.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le greffier.
Prions Dieu. Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom, nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toutes leurs délibérations étant accompagnées de ta bénédiction, réussissent au bien et au soulagement du peuple, quitte à plus de commettre leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant « Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Madame le député Moore.
Defer.
Monsieur le député Balash.
Sir, Deputy Balash is attending the UK for a medical appointment with his wife. I ask if the Assembly is minded to mark him as excusé, sir.
Members content to mark deputy excusez? Excusez.
Monsieur le député Coles. Vous jurez que Monsieur le député Coles est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé.
Malade.
Madame le député Poré.
Madam Deputy Pare is supporting a family member who is ill, might come in or not later on, depending on the state of the health. Excellent.
Members content to mark the deputy excusez? Excusez.
Monsieur le député Curtis.
Defer.
L'Assemblée est en nom, Monsieur le Président.
Les états sont constitués. The first matter is an urgent oral question that Deputy Tadier will put to the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. Sir, was the Minister made aware of the harrowing case of a wheelchair user who was obliged to stay in his vehicle throughout a recent DFDS sailing from Jersey to the UK because he was told that the lift was already closed? And does he accept that this situation was both inhumane and degrading to the individual in question? And will he conduct his own investigation to understand what took place to make sure it does not reoccur?
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful to the Deputy for raising this important issue. This incident was clearly unacceptable, and my officers raised it directly with DFDS as a matter of urgency on Monday the 8th of September. By their express admission, this incident falls a long way short of DFDS's own standards and those expected of them by the vessel flag state. DFDS has reached out to the passenger concerned and is reviewing the incident to find out why its usual procedures were not followed in this case. Furthermore, they have proactively reported this matter to the vessel flag state, given the deeply unsatisfactory passenger experience and unorthodox crossing. They are also shortly meeting with the government's Disability and Inclusion team to ensure that all passengers have access to the reliable and dignified experience that they rightly expect.
Supplementary.
Yes, sir. Is the Minister also concerned that this actually may be a breach of Jersey's anti-discrimination legislation, which has an underlying requirement to treat people with disabilities humanely, but also to make reasonable adjustments for them so that they're not disadvantaged compared to other citizens, and in this case, other customers?
Minister.
Sir, I'm unable to, as a politician, I'm unable to suggest what may or may not be against the law. But I can say that, in fact, I'll read a message from DFDS themselves. This was a bad mistake and we really let the customer down. We are changing our processes to prevent this happening again. The customer was correctly identified as needing assistance at checking in, but was put in the wrong lane and was missed when we loaded vehicles which needed lift access. They say, to be clear, the lift was working. It was a failure of process to get the passenger close to it so they could easily get to the passenger decks. The reason I read that is because this being a failure of a process as opposed to an intention to discriminate in any way suggests to me that maybe not, but I am not a lawyer, and certainly it would be for others to determine whether a discrimination act had taken place or not.
Well, I have questions from Deputy Dublé, then the Connotar of St Lawrence, then a Connotar of St Saviour, and a final supplementary from Deputy Tadier. Deputy Dublé.
So, did you see Deputy Wilson? I'm not suggesting you should ask her, but I think we're within the time, possibly.
All right, Deputy Wilson as well. Thank you. Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. When the Minister was commissioning this supplier of ferries, was the topic of accessibility covered? And is this something that this supplier, that the Minister understands this supplier has considered from the outset? Because oftentimes people with disabilities are thought of at the last minute rather than built into processes. Minister.
It is my understanding that under the kind of customer care elements of tender processes, I believe in both cases, there were elements about accessibility. I believe that was the case, and certainly, or at least we certainly were looking at their customer care kind of processes and policies is the word I'm looking for. And so both firms that were in that tender process obviously had their own procedures, and in the case of DFDS, their high rankings for customer care, and I believe accessibility in the past, were reassuring, is my understanding. But this is an incident. This, as I have just read out, doesn't seem to be the case that there's any intention to discriminate, as Deputy Tadier suggested. And it is a sad kind of human reality that processes do sometimes go wrong, and that incidents sometimes do take place. It doesn't excuse the action, but it does say that what needs to happen is to learn. And I believe the fact that The FDS themselves have directly reached out to the vessel flag state, which in this case is the United Kingdom, as opposed to the Bahamas for other ferry companies, and also reached out to our own disability and inclusion team. Shows that they take this extremely seriously. So I don't believe that they think accessibility is the last of the priorities. That doesn't seem to be the case to me.
Supplementary, Deputy?
Thanks, sir. And I understand that it was human error and not intention, but I believe that we can learn from this collectively. And would the Minister agree that actually this should not ever happen again? Because if there was an emergency on that boat, that individual couldn't have been, evacuated. Sorry, it's been a long week. And what I would like to see happen is for the Minister to talk to the Chief Minister so that across all departments, when any services are being commissioned, that there is some kind of step right at the beginning where accessibility is raised, and so that ministers can establish whether there are processes and indeed processes to recover if those initial processes don't go right. I'd like to see that embedded right from the beginning.
I believe such a conversation should probably involve the Treasury Minister, purely because procurement happens through Treasury, and so I think that's where that. I'm somewhat guessing here, but I think that may be the appropriate place, because the commissioning, etc., does often happen through Treasury and the commercial services function. I think the reaction from DFDS in terms of particularly going to the vessel flag state and, like I said, our own government disability and inclusion team suggests to me that they are very much wishing to learn from this and make sure that this doesn't happen again, which is the right attitude. Because it is correct that mistakes do happen, but what's important is that you learn from them, and it seems to me that they have that intention at heart. And I think the Deputy's comments about accessibility and procurement processes were entirely valid. So I'd be happy to have those conversations. I don't want the Treasury Minister to feel on the spot. It was my guessing whether it was the Treasury Minister as opposed to the Chief Minister, but whichever, all three of us.
Conataba St Lawrence.
So, I've got no idea how the person concerned must have felt being left in their vehicle. And I do wonder whether it was possible, whether they were travelling alone or whether they had someone with them and who could have stayed with them. My question, though, to the Minister is, how was the Minister made aware of this incident? Is there a process by which the department is made aware of such instances and I'll follow up.
Thank you. I thank the Constable for her question. I think it's really important, and this comes from DFDS directly, is that a staff member stayed with the passenger throughout the entire journey. They were not on their own during that journey. That's what they have informed me of. And from the evacuation perspective, my assumption, and it is only an assumption, is that that would have enabled evacuation, etc. Because one of the reasons, because the passenger was offered a voyage on the Stena Vinga, but because of the passenger's own need to keep to a schedule, that wasn't viable, so the passenger opted to go on the Levante jet. But they, as it says here, that the chief officer allowed the passenger to travel, but remain in the vehicle with a member of crew staying with them for the entire journey, or entire crossing, as I have here. I personally wasn't made aware of it, except via officers and the media. I think it's one of the things in Jersey is that I'm not speaking about this incident, I'm not convinced that every operational incident should come to a minister. I think operational incidents are meant to be dealt with by the companies themselves and the appropriate institutions around that, in this case the vessel flag state. And I think that's utterly appropriate that they have engaged with government. But it's one of my concerns for Jersey as a whole, is that by raising everything to a ministerial level, it's not appropriate. I personally cannot sail ferries. I cannot, mend lifts. I cannot change processes in a company. And I think it's really important that we do in Jersey perhaps needs to understand that operational matters do need to stay in any area with those companies or institutions that are providing the operations.
Supplementary?
So I have to just apologise to the Minister, because when he actually said how he had been made aware of this, somebody coughed, and I didn't actually hear what his answer was to that.
It was via the media and officers.
Oh, via the media and
officers.
And officers. So I suppose my supplementary has to be quite understandable. The Minister himself need not be made aware of operational matters that arise. But my question is, does the process with DFDS require them to inform his officers then of such incidences? Is that what happened in this case?
I think actually my officers, I can't be 100% sure, but I think my officers contacted DFDS. I don't think, and I have to say this, whether it's airlines, whether it's a ferry company, I am not convinced that such operational matters necessarily need to be reported to government. I think when there's a more general, if there's something going wrong at the port as a general thing, or something at the airport, then I can understand why that would be raised to government. But I think there is an element in Jersey we have to understand that government is doing the work of government. If this was systemic, that would clearly be a ministerial and government matter where a minister needs to go in and say, look, you've got a systemic problem with accessibility issues, you need to sort it out. And certainly with regard to the malfunctioning lift or non-functioning lift. May I, sir, I just ask members to not chatter around because I'm trying to answer a question.
Yes, members shouldn't converse noisily if they are distracted with speaker.
And so, it is a difficult line, but I am concerned in general in Jersey that we try to raise everything to a governmental level. And I don't think when there are instances which I hope are isolated, and if this was to prove in any way to not be isolated, there was the fact that at the beginning of service, the wheelchair lift was not in operation. That was a matter where the minister needed to go in because that was systemic. This appears now, the lift is working. This has nothing to do with the lift not working. This is the company's own processes. And it appears to be an isolated matter. If it appeared not to be an isolated matter, I would absolutely expect that to come up to government. But as an incident that is isolated, then I think it can rest with the company and the institutions that I've mentioned.
Thomas and Saviour.
Thank you, sir. So after the Spirit of Free Enterprise disaster many years ago, I was under the impression it was a legal requirement that all vehicles in the vehicle bays on board ship, on the vehicle decks, must be vacated during transit. Is that not the case, sir?
Minister.
I must profess my ignorance of the rules, sir, on that.
Supplementary. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. It appears the Minister's comments about if this was an isolated incident, you could understand why that would need to be dealt with operationally, but this isn't an isolated incident. In actual fact, there was an earlier incident earlier this year where there was a similar situation involving a person with a disability who could not access the provision on the boat, and that was due to the fact that the lift access was still a problem. So I think my question to the Minister is, what assurance is he seeking from DFDS on the learning that has taken place from these incidents that have clearly come to the public's attention, but I would imagine that there is a general concern for anybody travelling with a disability about some of the adaptations and provisions that need to be addressed? And can he give some assurance to the Assembly that he will, as part of the contract monitoring arrangements, ensure that this is routinely monitored? Because I referred to a statement made by the Chief Minister earlier also, where he said that the operating agreement sets performance standards relating to customer satisfaction. And I think what we would like to be assured about is how often they're monitored, how these are brought to the attention of the operator, and what changes happen as a result of these incidents taking place. Thank you, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I can understand why the Deputy suggests that this isn't isolated. The reason I say it is only because I understand the reasons to be different. The first, I believe the Deputy is referring to an instance that occurred when there was no lift provision on the Levante jet. That was something that happened as they brought the vessel into service, and as government we weighed in and said, you need to sort this out, this has to change very quickly, and they worked to change that by the end of July, and the lift was brought into service by the end of July. The reasons for this incident appear to be very different to that original incident, and it is because of the difference in circumstances that I am saying that it does not appear to be systemic. There are two different causes for this, but I can understand why the Deputy is concerned there are. I think with regard to the monitoring, yes, I am more than happy to ask officers to ask in their quarterly meetings that they speak about accessibility and the provision of facilities for people who have accessibility needs, and to ensure that these matters are learned from. As I said in response to Deputy Dublay's question, there is, I am pleased to see that the FDS have not hidden from this in terms of their own reporting themselves to the vessel flag state and their own contacting the government's Disability and Inclusions Unit. That suggests to me strongly that they wish to learn from this, and that is the appropriate attitude. As I said, it does not excuse the mistakes that led to these incidents, but it absolutely does suggest they have the right attitude in learning.
Supplementary. Final supplementary for you, Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, can I clarify, contrary to what the Minister said, I did not suggest that there was intention to discriminate here, but what I said is that there may have been an act of discrimination under 7A of the law, which talks about indirect discrimination, failure to make reasonable adjustments regarding disability. And one of the questions I would like the Minister to ask was, would it have not been more reasonable for the FTS to have paused the departure, to move things around, to open the lift up so that this individual didn't have to spend the 4+ hours sitting in his van? I'm almost lost for words, sir. And the real question here also is the Minister not concerned that there's been a breach of law? So not simply a failure of process, but as the Constable of St Saviour has indicated, it seems that there's a prima facie breach of international maritime law by keeping somebody on the car deck. I know that when I travel with my dog, we're told that we're not allowed to go down except at specific times to see the dog in the vehicle. So they're very strict about that normally. But also a breach of Jersey's anti-discrimination law. And given the fact that it's all of our jobs to uphold the law, and not least for the Minister, if he thinks that there have been breaches, would he indicate whether there's any mechanism within his department, certainly when it comes to maritime law, to have this particular incident investigated properly?
Minister.
I only demurred on the issue of law because I am not a lawyer and I am not au fait with all these laws. If there has been a breach of law, then I believe it would fall to the Harbour Master to look into that. I'm happy to speak to the Harbour Master to look into that. I think this is one of those interesting cases where if and only if the Deputy is correct in his interpretation of the law, with regard to staying on the car deck, that was the solution which enabled the passenger to travel to their destination in the time that the passenger needed to travel to their destination. I don't know what the situation would have been with the case of unloading the vessel, but my guess is that this passenger would then have also missed they were travelling onwards, and so they needed to get to their point of departure for travel at a certain time. And so it may be the case that if there was a breach of the law, it was with the intention to help this traveller get to where they needed to at the time they needed to. And so something of a catch-22 in that respect, given that following the mistakes that they had made in their processes. But I will speak to the Harbour Master and ask him to look into that from a legal perspective.
Thank you, Minister. Now return to the residential tenancy amendment law, and we'd reached the appel in second reading, and Deputy Gorst had requested that there be a separate vote on Articles 7A to 7G inclusive, which the Minister agreed to, and the Connotab of St Lawrence asked for a copy of the law showing the amendments, which has now been supplied. But we do need now to move to the appel, do not, Minister? That's your understanding, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And so how do you propose to take matters? All the amendments taken together apart from 7A to 7G?
That's right, sir.
Yes. So the appel has been called. 4 members are invited to return to the seats. This will be all articles, all amendments with the exception of the provisions introducing Articles 7 capital A to 7G inclusive. And to remind members, 7A to 7G is the title, Restrictions on Rent Increases and Providing Rent Information. So we'll vote first on the articles in second reading with the exception of 7A to 7G inclusive. I invite the greffier to open the voting. Four members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce those articles have been adopted. 31 votes for, 13 votes contra, and no abstentions. Now move on to the...
Sir, could I just ask a question? Given the point that was raised yesterday by the Constable of St Lawrence, and I understand we do have the documents, could we have just a little bit more information about the content of the articles as we're voting on them? I believe that would help to guide members through this.
You have now voted on them all, apart from 7A to 7G inclusive. Maybe, Minister, it's appropriate for you to indicate what 7A to 7E inclusive deal with.
So this is all the provisions to do with rent itself. That includes the stabilisation mechanisms, and the gathering of rent data is included in that, sir. And as I said when this was raised yesterday, that not having this article would cause substantial issues with the operation of the law.
So we're now voting on 7A to 7G inclusive, which can be found at page 53 and page 54 of the ministerial proposition, and of course can be found in the document you received yesterday afternoon from the greffier. I invite the greffier to please open the voting in relation to these articles. All members the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce those articles have also been adopted. 24 votes for, 20 votes contra.
Can we have the vote, sir?
Yes.
Those members voting for the Connétable St Helier, St Lawrence, St Peter, St Martin, St John and St Mary, and deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Lehegras, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, War, Renov, Catherine Curtis, Beltham, Jearn, Kovac, Andrews, Stevenson, Foray and Coles. And those members voting contre, the Connétable of Trinity, St Clement, Grouville, St Ouen and St Saviour, and deputies Labby, Morel, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, Miles, Scott, Rose Binney, Miller, Howe, Tom Binney, Ferry, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Luce.
Minister, do you propose the matter in third reading?
Yes, sir. Can I thank members for their support so far on this? We've had, in total, I think, over 2 days' worth of debates on this, lots of debates on amendments, and I'm absolutely confident that what we have before us now, as approved at the article stage, is stronger than where we started. I hope that myself and contributions from scrutiny and, in fact, Deputy Renov as well, have been able to provide members with perhaps some reassurance that they were hoping for moving in for this debate. And I thank all those members who've had all kinds of dialogue in the run-up to this to help provide that. And I hope, with having had the opportunity to go through the consolidated version of this overnight, members can see that this is a good piece of work that seeks to do all that it set out to do, which was to provide a better and more modern framework for renting for people who rent those homes and people who rent out those homes as well, sir. And that I obviously completely respect every member who might want to maintain a principled opposition to this all the way through, but I hope that members will recognise that some of the points that were made in opposition to it at various points have been dealt with by the amendments and by rebuttals that have been presented in this. So in third reading, sir, I hope members will continue to support it.
Thank you, Minister. Is the matter seconded?
Yes, sir.
Connétable St Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the GREF on behalf of members for producing this document for us. Notwithstanding that I sat through the debate over the past 2 days and understood the amendments at the time, without this, I think that I would not have known this morning exactly what I was voting for, but thanks to the GREF and the officers, I knew exactly what I was voting for this morning, sir, and clearly the law has my support. And I thank the Minister for the work that he's done on this, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'll not repeat the whole of my previous speech, as this is now a matter of record. But I do rise to emphasise my real concern regarding the economical aspects, which in my view have been put to one side and not been taken as seriously as they should regarding the changes that are being introduced. I'm unsure, sir, who agreed to the release of the economic impact assessment to all states members, however, which I express my thanks for whoever authorised that release. But this important paper was actually sent after the vote was taken on Tuesday, when the principles were presented by the Minister. So I must ask why states members were only furnished with this information after the proposition was presented and voted on. I understand that scrutiny, and I will stand corrected if I've misheard, was provided with this paper. Surely members should have been provided with the paper at the same time, and if not, why not? It's my view that states members should be furnished with any relevant facts to ensure that when voting on propositions, we can make an informed decision. From my research as set out in my speech, I expressed concerns regarding the economical position going forward, expressing that we need to be cautious, take no risks, as we just don't know what is around the corner. In my view, sir, I feel the changes in the draft tenancy law at this time may be a risk to our economy. Therefore, I will not be supporting a third reading. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I rise to thank the Minister and his officers and the scrutiny panel and the scrutiny officers who have put in such an incredible amount of work to bring this proposition before the Assembly, and to the members of the State's GREF and officials who have helped the debate, in their words, the most difficult piece of legislation they have ever had to deal with, run smoothly. My position is this: I support good landlords and good tenants. I do not support greedy and bad landlords or bad tenants. That said, I need to express my concerns about the proposals. Thanks to the work of the scrutiny panel and Deputy Renniff's agreed amendment for removal of the 5% cap, proposals are improved. But I still feel that the proposals may have a deleterious effect on the number of private dwellings available for rent, as I have spoken with many good landlords who have said they will not want to be landlords in future if this legislation goes ahead. I've had one landlord in tears in my surgery. Unfortunately, sir, these proposals are bringing fear and worry. The Common Strategic Plan says the government will deliver, I quote, a new residential tenancy law to improve arrangements for both tenants and landlords. So I do not believe what is proposed will improve arrangements for both landlords and tenants. It has been reported that it may be beneficial for some tenants, but not all, and it will not be beneficial, in my opinion, for landlords. Currently, a landlord and a tenant sign a straightforward agreement that can be renewed on agreed fixed term. I am unsure now what agreement can be signed if this legislation is passed. Will every landlord and every tenant need to refer continually to the hundreds of pages of legislation? We have been warned that there are likely to be unintended consequences to Jersey's economy too, because the residential tenancy law does not evidence the problems or the scale of these problems it is correcting. It is not possible to assess whether, on balance, these amendments offer a net benefit to Jersey's economy. It is not based on evidence. Indeed, the law may have a negative impact on Jersey's economy as a result in landlords exiting the market. This will lead to fewer properties being offered to rent, resulting in an increase in the average rental prices for those remaining due to market forces and less choice. Worse, regrettably, the possibility of more islanders with no home at all. We rely on the private rental accommodation for homes for half of the population. I want stability in rented housing for this island. I want things that are simple and easy to understand. Sir, I urge members to vote against these proposals. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. A member reminded us that our responsibility is to make good law. Conviction alone does not make good law. Unfortunately, neither does the hard work of officers and scrutiny if they are working in the dark and the policy intent remains unclear. To make good law, we must first be clear what it is meant to deliver. In other words, what are we trying to do and what will the law do? Only then can we ask, will it work? And at what cost? That is the question addressed by the late-stage economic impact assessment. Politicians, like investors, are not professional gamblers. The risks they take should be educated ones. Nor should the hard work of the government economists who prepared the economic impact assessment be sidelined. They are not political advisors. They seek to be apolitical. Their struggle is that the policy intent here is unclear. At the beginning of the speech, the Minister described this law as a better and more modern framework to help tenants and landlords. He also has said this law supports victims of revenge evictions and unaffordable rent. I presume. The impact assessment asks, will it really? What is the actual evidence for revenge evictions and extortionate rents? How widespread is the problem? And in what circumstances do they occur? And what would be the political and economic trade-off for the community as a whole if this law is supported? Our common strategic policy had a different focus: to build confidence in the rental sector as part of the future Jersey outcome of affordable living under the theme of economic well-being. Affordable living strengthens the economy. A broad, stable rental market sustains it. Yet the assessment and contributions during this debate warn that this law, if approved, risks undermining both. Think ahead to the budget debate to be held later this year. We will be scrambling to fund priorities from whatever funds we can find. Do we also want to deter investment in the provision of private rental properties when there already are easier and more profitable ways for private people with funds or properties to earn money from capital from those properties? It is a mistake to assume landlord divestment benefits affordable housing. Homes sold may not go to lower income buyers. They may be bought by wealthier owner-occupiers, converted into luxury residences or lucrative Airbnbs, or even left vacant. The effect on prices may be marginal, but the rental market shrinks, leaving tenants who cannot buy with fewer options and higher rents. And if rent controls are drawn too tightly, landlords may repackage homes as private lodgings for 5 or fewer people, removing security or tenure and escaping regulation of the quasi-rents that they get. That strips protections for individuals and makes renting more precarious. The Minister's focus has generated much paperwork, but what is its value if the rights it creates are not enforced? A tribunal can intimidate tenants as much as a court, because you cannot force a camel to drink. This draft law provides no route to more supportive landlords or more social housing, measures that would make a real difference to victims of bad practice who, believe it or not, I wish to help too. Instead, it risks driving away supportive landlords. Restricting leases or forcing landlords to justify decisions will not stop dishonesty, but will reduce confidence in renting and supply. The assessment calculates £300,000 in new costs for landlords, and many of these are not professional landlords. It will be easier and cheaper for such landlords to create lightly regulated lodgings and offer secure tenancies. These are foreseeable consequences. One unforeseen consequence was mentioned to me by a tenant in St Helier, who's now leaving the island. That is, that landlords will take fewer risks in taking on tenants. In the UK, many letting agencies are using a tenant screening internet platform that demands high deposits for what it deems, under its algorithms, to be riskier tenants. Oh, and it does not recognise Jersey passports, which almost means the deposits go up. Do we want to make things easier or harder for tenants? Meanwhile, the Minister's current powers to extend notice periods for periodic tenancies remain untested, let alone enforced. Practical support for tenants, social housing, advisory and mediation services improved, may help more than another layer of regulation. We should also remember the real drivers of unaffordable living: stagnant wages and rising inflation. These cannot be regulated away by targeting landlords. Over-regulation risks costing our workforce, homes and people, deepening our economic problems, which are pretty significant. As for our economic problems, we must stop treating the symptoms rather than administering the cure and putting out fires with gasoline. We can learn from past mistakes. When the Assembly rushed to raise the apprentice minimum wage, the unintended effects were found to be damaging, and the policy had to be abandoned, reversed, partly reversed, whatever you want to call it. That retreat was reasonably quick, not quick enough for some who didn't benefit from apprentice schemes. Reaching from this law, if implemented, will not be so fast, and the effects can be much more longer lasting. The Minister's conviction has not been matched by interministerial collaboration. He resisted compromise, even with scrutiny, through much of this process of debate, and delayed accepting amendments from scrutiny until the last moment. Now he has run out of road. He cannot change that economic impact assessment and what it's pointed out. Rejecting this draft law should not be seen as a failure, but as a chance to start again on fresher ground with more open eyes. If the true aim is to support tenants, the Minister might look to these policy goals of expanding advice services, supporting courts and assessing rents, strengthening mediation, using existing powers to link notice to tenancy length, and providing clearer routes, more support into social housing. These measures, at least in my opinion, would deliver affordable living and economic well-being together, not at the expense of each other. So, sir, I urge members to reject this draft law, and thank them all for looking into the arguments and thinking much more about this issue. If they do so, it's not an ending, it should be a beginning. And let us, in that way, support the Minister in building a simpler, collaborative solution that offers practical supports to tenants, sustains landlord confidence, and strengthens the rental market upon which so many of our workers rely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable St Martin.
Thank you, sir. As all my parishioners, well, everyone who knows me knows, I see lots of parishioners every week, and many are landlords and some are tenants. And to my surprise, not one person has come in to see me about the RTL. And Statistics Jersey, as an aside, Statistics Jersey have reported that St Martin's is actually the most intelligent parish in the island, which I thought I'd just like to get in there. So people in St Martin do know.
Here, so
People do know what they're talking about, but it's absolutely true. I haven't had the scaremongering that lots of other people seem to have had. Again, so I have read it through. I've read it thoroughly. I will be voting for this. But before I sit down, I would like to say that this has been a really good, robust and technical debate, and this has gone on for a long time. And I really want to praise the scrutiny panel and the officers of the GREF and the Minister and his team in government. And if anyone asks in future why we have scrutiny, I think we should all point to this debate, because actually I think scrutiny and with the debate, it's been gold standard. So thank you.
Conor Greville.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure the Minister already knows my opinions about this. I'm sure we've spoken about it many times. And I, too, like previous speakers, believe this provides us with a great deal of uncertainty in the marketplace. Marketplaces rely on an element of certainty so they can thrive, and I believe this is doing just the opposite. I also believe, and like the Minister, I have very little statistical proof for this, but it's my belief that a lot of landlords have already made the decision to sell. And the marketplace that they are trying to sell within is not going to support that sale at all, because it's in the doldrums. We have many single bedroom flats that are unsold in the marketplace, and that is suppressing it. Interest rates are also suppressing it, and there are other factors. So I believe they've already made that decision, and they're waiting for the market to improve before they sell. And my daughter, as we've already said in July, has already done so, and she did so at the right time. So, sir, they are facing a great deal of uncertainty. A lot of their costs have gone up. Their insurance certainly has. Mine own has gone up by 27%, sir. Building materials are going up way beyond the cost of inflation. The ability to get contractors onto site, if you're a single unit owner, is very difficult indeed, and their costs have gone up. Everything is going up, and to be told they cannot put their rent up within this framework, I believe, is providing that uncertainty. That uncertainty is what's going to force them out of the market. And I cannot support this, sir, because, like other speakers, I believe they are already in the process of going through sales to get rid of these properties, which are no longer assets, they're becoming a liability. And I cannot support this, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. David Tadier.
So it's probably not usually good to speak out of frustration or anger, so I'll try not to do that. But the last speaker, I wonder sometimes, where is the self-awareness in this assembly? We have a representative for a rural district standing up saying, my daughter, who used to be a landlord, just sold her property, and she did all right out of it, and presumably now she's only got one property that she lives in. Well, welcome to the real world, Constable, because most people in Jersey are not landlords. They do not own vast amounts of property. If they're lucky, they might be paying off a mortgage in the home that they live in, along with a partner, and struggling to do that every month. And probably that's the reason we see people not going out in the evenings, because they haven't got any money, to buy the ice creams that they might in France or to go to the restaurants. That's the reality that we're living with in Jersey. And simply to say that some landlords may have to sell some of their properties because they're worried, I think is simply scaremongering. And I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that. And the overwhelming message I've had talking to people when I go to the shops after work and say, oh, I hear you're in for a long debate today, you're debating the residential tenancy. Shouldn't half of the people in there be not allowed to vote? Because aren't they all landlords? Those are the real messages we've been getting in this debate, throughout the debate from the outside, because we've been living in a bubble here. And when we hear members talking about the potential unintended consequences and the economic negative consequences this might have for the economy, I'll tell you what's negative potentially for the economy is not having young people in the island because they see no future for themselves here, because they can't afford the rents, let alone the house prices. And I know members will try to argue in some sophisticated way that actually this is going to have a knock-on effect on the housing market and prices. But actually what we are seeing is some glimmers of hope. The mortgage people and also the estate agents that I've been talking to say, one of them who lives in St. Brillard's, I met on a recent walk, and I said, how are things going in the industry? He says, things are starting to pick up. If you look at the transactions that have been through the courts in the last 12 months, they're up from what they were last year. The interest rates are coming down, and we're starting to see some movement in the market. So I have full confidence that in the market, actually, that the market, if landlords sell properties, they will be bought. And they'll either be bought, as I've said before, by people looking to continue to be landlords who want to consolidate, because there will be some bargains to be had here for rich landlords. They can come in and swoop up. Is it called in the bear market? I don't know, is that the right expression? When the prices are going down, you buy up and you consolidate your assets and you provide more rental accommodation for those landlords who are getting slightly weak on it. And when I turn to the deputy for the district that I live in, and she says that members of the public have been coming to her landlords in tears. Well, I think that's largely because they've been... That's right, she's my deputy. She's one of my deputies. Yeah. And when the landlords come to her saying that they're in tears, I'm afraid that's because of the disinformation and the misinformation that has been spread around by this debate. Because as the moderate members in this assembly who've sat through all of the amendments have heard, actually this is really modest. It doesn't force landlords to do anything. It doesn't even force them to abide by RPI increases. They can put prices up above RPI. They can put prices up by 50% if they want to, but it has to be reasonable. It has to be agreed by the tenant. There has to be consent. So the underlying principle that it is still a private arrangement between tenant and landlord holds true. In all circumstances where both parties are acting reasonably, accepting that there are going to be imperfections and imbalances of power on both sides, because of course the landlord holds the keys, maybe in one sense they hold the property, but the tenant has to act responsibly in it. Of course we know that that's why the underlying purpose of the law is to ensure only in extreme circumstances where there is an abuse on either side that the law can kick in. But otherwise, the mutual relationship, as Deputy Balash, I think, has falsely argued, hasn't fundamentally changed. It's fundamentally remained the same, that tenants and landlords will be allowed to negotiate privately and peacefully as they should. And so, sir, I would ask that actually, as we were on the brink of passing something, I think, quite momentous, but actually also quite modest in a sense. These are laws which, you know, Tory governments in other countries would have put through a long time ago because they're really the basics. And I won't quote them verbatim, but I don't often like to quote the Jersey Evening Post, but I think their editorial today really summed it up. It's about getting that balance right between tenants on the one side who expect some security of tenure, to be left in peace, to pay their rent on time, and landlords to expect that actually they will get their income on time, they will act reasonably. It shouldn't be rocket science. And I think what we have seen through this dialectical process, which has been referred to scrutiny, you know, it could have been called in, of course, at the second reading. It wasn't. I think scrutiny in good faith have done their work. And I think that there have been some real material changes where the minister's taken into consideration, put aside some of his maybe what would be ideological concerns and actually looked at it pragmatically and said, how do we get to a middle point that protects both landlords and tenants, which has got the backing of scrutiny, which I think should have the backing of the majority in this assembly, sir. And I do congratulate, of course, not just the minister, but the scrutiny panel and all those who have been involved in this, sir. I reiterate, sir, I come at this from, I hope, a middle point of view where I've got friends and family who are landlords, but I also know lots of people in Jersey who are tenants. But I think the vast majority who are neither tenants nor landlords look at us to try and put something reasonable in place. And they'll be saying, you know, I think for the first time, not an easy task, but Deputy Mezek is hopefully with the team around him in the wider assembly, being able to put something workable together. And we need that to have time to bed in and to make sure that it works. And of course, if problems do arise in the future that haven't been envisaged one way or the other, then those can be addressed through the legislative process. And that would be for future scrutiny panels and for the future assembly to keep a vigilant eye on, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. And I am going to support the Minister on this. I think it's reasonable, and I think with the efforts of the scrutiny panel that we've got to something that is a good balance. And clearly there were problems there. I want to refer again to the number of submissions that the scrutiny panel received. So clearly there were problems there, and the Minister has tackled that. So I will be voting to support it, but I have listened also to the risks that were mentioned. I think Deputy Scott raised them again in her speech, and we've spoken about the impact on the tenants, the impacts on landlords, and I think we all have those risks in mind. But I would like to ask the Minister how the impact of this legislation on these groups of people, how is it going to be measured going forward? So how are we going to actually understand, if we pass this legislation today, how will we understand that it is doing what the Minister intends it to do and what the Assembly intends it to do? Are there going to be set review points that the Minister would recommend to his, either he himself if he's reappointed or to his predecessor? And what would that look like? What do the measures themselves look like? What does success look like? What might the potential risks be? And how will the Minister mitigate those? And there's another group of islanders, which I don't believe we have really spoken about, although Deputy Tadier did just touch on them. And that's, sometimes we describe this group as Middle Jersey. And it's often islanders who are neither tenants nor landlords. So maybe we haven't thought about them a great deal in this debate. Islanders who maybe own one home and live in it. And I count myself in that group as well. And Middle Jersey, not just in the context of housing, but the Social Security Minister, we've had lots of questions for the Minister, my panel have, and I know that this is something that she is bearing in mind. But other ministers, I would really like them to think about this group as well, and the Housing Minister in particular, because whilst I've been thinking this through and talking it through with other members, I'm not sure what impact this is going to have on that group of islanders, Middle Jersey, who own one home and live in it. Sometimes at great struggle. And again, Deputy Tadier mentioned islanders who may be in this situation that can't afford to go out and buy an ice cream or go for a meal. And that's the reality for many islanders who are, yes, privileged to a certain extent to own their own home, but make great sacrifices and are not entitled to government support, often in the form of income support or other means of supporting. So what happens if landlords do sell properties now in numbers and the housing market is flooded even further and prices drop even further? What happens then? What will the government do? And so I've advocated in the past for help to buy schemes, which are often targeted at first-time buyers. But what about those islanders who have made huge sacrifices to buy that one modest home to live in? How is this legislation going to impact that group of islanders? What about people who are maybe in a modest one-bedroom flat, of which we know that's the type of housing that the prices are dropping most drastically, and maybe they find themselves in negative equity, and they want to start a family? What do they do? What help to buy will they get if they feel negative impacts in that respect? Now, I will reiterate, I am going to support this legislation and I do think members should support it, but I want us to take very seriously the measuring and monitoring of any negative impacts and on different areas of our population. And I'll just refer briefly, sir, to a review that my panel is currently undertaking, a sub-panel, because we are hearing that people are putting off having children or not having children altogether, or terminating pregnancies that are wanted because they cannot afford adequate housing for a family. So this situation is really serious. And I can see from the Minister's expression that he does take this seriously, and I'll be interested to hear how he's going to monitor this and plan to mitigate it. And I'll be listening with interest to the Minister's summing up.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Sharon.
Thank you, sir. At the beginning of this debate, I challenged members to be bold and not shy away from complex reform, but be prepared to shape, test and improve it together. Because islanders deserved a full and open debate that took us from the principles to the details that govern their homes, rights and responsibilities, and I think we stepped up to the challenge. We did not dismiss these amendments to the law out of hand, but we have worked together to discuss the different elements that we felt needed further adjustments and voted accordingly. And now it is up for us individually to decide if these draft amendments to the 2011 law, with the enhanced amendments that we have voted on over the last few days, is something to support. And for me, it is. And I want to emphasise that as a landlord in Jersey, I support this, the changes that are made now to the amendments. But I also am a landlord in Belgium with much harder and stronger, much stronger legislation that landlords have to abide to there. And it's all right. We manage. And so I just wanted to maybe take that moment to say I don't think we should, the landlords should be worried about these changes that are here. They are modest. As Deputy Tadier said, in many other countries, more conservative governments pass this kind of legislation, and it's something to adjust to, but it is not something that it's catastrophic as ability to be a landlord. And so I wanted to maybe just focus on some of the changes that we have done in the last few days, because I do hear that members may still, and those maybe listening as well, maybe not quite understand maybe where we've got to within this the law now than maybe where it was before. So on rent stabilisation, there has been an amended version of rent stabilisation measures because there has been a strong call for greater transparency and predictability in rent setting. There has been evidence for this. Scrutiny has heard this evidence. There has been reports done in the past, not by necessarily this current government, but in the past as well, that there needs to be greater transparency and predictability in rent setting. The panel and expert advisor found limiting rent increases to once a year with 2 months' notice, and in many instances limited RPI, uncontroversial, and were aligned with best practice. And as I've said before, during a public hearing, the Jersey Estate Agents Association confirmed that enshrining them in the amendment law would merely formalise an existing convention. After the adopted amendment, this is what the rent stabilisation measures would be, and I think that they are proportionate. On the rent tribunal, the creation of a rent tribunal is positive as a dispute resolution mechanism, though there are still questions remaining about resourcing operations and reliance on secondary legislation to create the rent tribunal. And so to address this, the panel recommends that the Minister publish practical decision-making guidance in consultation with the judicial greffier and prioritise reliable rent data collection. As we've heard over the last few days, this data collection is widely welcome and desperately needed. And the adoption of amendments A2 and A3 by scrutiny means that the tribunal member qualifications are set by regulation, not ministerial order, and that most importantly, the tribunal stays as a reactive and passive body. Together, these amendments safeguard the tribunal's expertise while ensuring that its role remains proportionate to its remit. Many tenants expressed to scrutiny the evidence that we collected were concerned that under the 2011 law, it has been too easy for landlords to serve notice to end a tenancy. This has made tenants reluctant to raise real issues for fear of fixed terms ending silently through non-renewals or being served 3-month notice without reason during periodic terms. The move to default periodic tenancies is welcomed by tenant-focused organisations, but there are still concerns remaining about its practical impact. And that's why we have, and it maybe talks to Deputy Dublay's point, we've recommended to the Minister for a post-implementation review within 2 years and the publication of clear guidance for both tenants and landlords. And I believe the Minister has accepted this. And as amended, the articles now allow for an initial fixed term of up to 3 years with a chance to end that contract early with no reason, giving a 3-month notice for landlords and a 1-month notice for tenants, provided that clearly specified break clauses requirements are included in that agreement. And the panel considers the Minister's adopted amendment to have break clauses clearly stated in the initial fixed-term contract will improve transparency and ensure that both landlords and tenants understand their rights and obligations from the outset. And as we've noted in our report, there is no clear evidence that a shift to periodic tenancies in and of itself will provide more security than rolling fixed-term contracts. But where the Minister is putting forward in his policy objectives is that where it provides more security is when these contracts are linked to a specific notice regime where notice periods can range from 7 days to 1 year. And with the amendment by Security Panel being able to give no reason 1 year notice, this provides that extra security that landlords were calling for if one of the reasons for notice does not fall into what they need. Article 6F will provides a wide-ranging list of grounds for notice. As the Minister has confirmed, in order to serve notice to landlord, it only requires the landlord to reference which grounds under the Article 6F they are using. There is no requirement to provide any evidence up front. It would be up to the tenant to initiate court proceedings to challenge a false or misleading notice, placing responsibility for correcting landlord's non-compliance on the tenant. And the panel was concerned about the objective test of what constitutes, for example, a serious breach of tenancy, and we've asked the Minister to provide clear guidance on what this could be. As agreed with the Minister on enforcement and nuisance grounds, the requirement for a police or state's employee to attend a nuisance was considered impractical and risked misdirecting public resources. And the panel welcomes that adoption of Amendment C1, which removed this requirement and ensures that public resources are directed appropriately while still enabling landlords to make immediate action in genuine cases of serious or repeated nuisance. And the panel have also recommended the Minister publish example-based guidance to clarify what constitutes a serious breach or nuisance to ensure that the provisions of the law are interpreted correctly. The Assembly also adopted the panel's amendment D1 to move the level 3 criminal penalty for a landlord giving false or misleading ground for notice into secondary legislation. This will provide greater flexibility and enable future refinement through proper scrutiny, ensuring that penalties remain proportionate. And as agreed, scrutiny will be working with the Minister to develop this further. We also recommend cohesive development of civil and criminal penalties in consultation with the Viscount to ensure consistency and enforceability across the penalties framework. Members will appreciate the amendment law is very complex and difficult to navigate. As such, the panel have made a number of recommendations aimed to improving islanders' knowledge. We have recommended updating the model tenancy agreement, designating the Housing Advice Service as the primary contact point and ensuring it's fully resourced to support tenants and landlords. The transition from the 2011 law to the new regime will be staggered, with existing fixed-term leases running their course, but periodic agreements falling under the new law at commencement of the law. And I hope that I've given maybe a little bit more fullness to understanding by members and those listening of what changes we have made in the last few days to try to make this law, as we've heard from members, proportionate and supporting both tenants and landlords. So I want to conclude by thanking colleagues for the constructive debate for supporting the panel's amendments. This has been a challenging and technical piece of legislation, but by working together we have significantly, I believe, strengthened it. The changes agreed during this debate will make the law fairer, clearer and more workable in practice, and they reflect the concerns of tenants, landlords and stakeholders alike. And I commend the Assembly for its careful consideration of these issues, and I trust that the law, as amended, will provide a more balanced framework that serves the island well in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable of St Mary, would you have a point of clarification?
Yes.
Will you accept point of clarification from Deputy Ward?
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to wait until the Deputy had finished his speech, out of respect. You said that existing tenancies would run its course. Could the Deputy direct us as to where does it say that in the draft law that we received last evening? Because I couldn't find that. So I'd be most grateful if you could actually spell that out, because it's a very important aspect, sir.
Yes. So under Schedule 3, it provides that transitional arrangements. Also within the scrutiny panel's document, we have a clear chapter on transitional arrangements. And I believe the ministers also, when in introducing the law, within the first part, he had a report that also clearly stated the transitional arrangements. And just to say that it would mean that any fixed-term leases would run its course, and then a new fixed-term lease would be able to be issued under the law. So that would then mean that the contract could be up to 3 years and fixed term after the fixed term is finished.
Yes.
Yeah, carrying on with that clarification, I tried to look for that and I see that the 9-year lease has been removed. So if somebody's on a 9-year lease as of today, that runs. It's just not clear, sir, in the actual law, if somebody reads that. We need that assurance. Thank you, sir.
Perhaps the Minister in reply will deal with Schedule 3 and assist you in relation to that. Comment over St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I'm pleased to follow my scrutiny chair on this. And given the details she's provided, I assure members I shall not be going through it again. I would like, though, to make a few general points. The first is that at the outset of this debate, I expressed my concern that, or my recognition that views on this general reform or whatever were polarised. We all received emails from one side or the other, please vote for, please vote against, so any reference to what we were scrutinising and the nuances contained within the law. I like to think, sir, that with the aid of the scrutiny report and the contributions made by members and the response from the Housing Minister, we have arrived at a situation where there is some sort of more general consensus and the public as a whole do recognise that this is a comprehensive and coordinated response to the situation. And in that connection, I revert to a comment made by Deputy Renner in one of his earlier speeches that this is actually a proposition made by the Assembly rather than just the Minister. And I thank the Minister for accepting our recommendations. And in the course of this debate, I have obviously given a great priority to the public's views as a whole, as proper scrutiny member, but I've also had regard to my own situation. As mentioned at the outset, I am myself a landlord, having converted outbuildings in our premises, and it's natural I should look at the new law, if passed, to see what changes it makes to my present position. And the answer, sir, is virtually none. I believe that personally I follow best practice. I would never dream of increasing rental by more than RPI, never more than once a year, and I believe that is the established practice for most landlords. I therefore do revert to what I think is the Minister's position that this should not change very much. Most landlords have nothing to fear by this new legislation, and I do ask them those thinking of exiting the market as to why they should feel the need to do so. That said, so I am obliged to utter one word of caution, and reading yesterday's Times in the evening, there is a headline, a UK headline obviously, landlords sell up ahead of renters' rights bill. There are certain parallels within our proposed law with the renters' rights bill, and I can see why analogy is made to the Jersey situation. However, the renters' rights bill is more fundamental. It introduces standards, I think, which we already have, and that the compliance with those standards will be enough to frighten some UK landlords out of the situation. And there's also the related point that it's not just a renters' rights bill which might be frightening landlords, but the threat of introduction of national insurance. And I raise that point in particular, sir, to say that whilst I do support this proposition in its entirety, we must be careful of and recognise that landlords are a vulnerable breed at the moment, that they feel that they've had a whole succession of legislation imposed upon them. Some may well think in terms of exiting the market, and I do urge ministers to think twice before introducing any further regulations which might affect them. But sir, that said, sir, I support the proposition. Thanks, sir.
No time for St John.
Thank you, sir. So, as already been said, the issue has been well debated and the proposals have been thoroughly scrutinised. Many people contributed to that scrutiny process and much of the feedback has been accepted. I'd like to add my thanks to both the scrutiny panel and the Minister And in my personal experience, the Minister has been collaborative, and we now found ourselves with an improved system. Should also pay tribute, sir, to the Jersey Landlords Association, who those members I've spoken to have been reasonable people, have listened, and have contributed to this debate and discussion. So if we cast our minds back to July, sir, Deputy Wilson asked a very important oral question in that sitting. The Deputy asked, what measures, if any, are being introduced in the coming months to reverse the continuing trend of more people leaving Jersey than moving to the island, particularly in relation to the 20 to 29-year-olds? Sir, by supporting the proposals, we all have an opportunity to show islanders, and particularly our young islanders, that we're taking these issues seriously. We received correspondence, or some of us received correspondence from Caritas that told us the changes being suggested are actually supported by many landlords who see them as very sensible and not onerous in any way. Many have voiced to them that they are helpful to landlords as well as tenants. Sir, personally, I shared my concerns, my personal concerns and those concerns expressed to me by landlords with the Minister, particularly around the 5% and the notice period. Sir, the Minister listened to me and others with the same concerns. Both of these have, in my view, been addressed. I also spoke to landlords, sir, during the period who clearly hadn't read the proposals but had relied on what they were being told. Sir, earlier this week, myself and my colleague in front of me from St. Juan spoke to a landlord. Their view was that the changes were acceptable with the amendments and contained, in their words, some good stuff. It's fair to say that the individual was and is not a fan of the Minister. That said, they are a very reasonable person and they can see the merits in front of us. So, as I said in July, in supporting this, members will give hope to existing island families, parents and grandparents who are keen for their family to return, parents and grandparents who don't want to see their children leave. So, members will also give hope to those who work in health, education and other sectors who are fed up of seeing people come and go as if it were a revolving door. Only this week, sir, I was talking to someone whose landlord lives in Australia. They will not fix a problem with their house, sir, and they are threatening to leave the island because of this small matter. We've got to get further advanced. Finally, sir, I hope members will do the same as I do on each and every proposal, and that is vote for the proposals based on their content, the benefit for the whole community, and not based on who brings the proposal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conrad. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I put my light for the Deputy Tadier's speech, which I got to jump, but it was good to hear several speakers in between, so I'll maybe calm down now. But for speech, is it a possibility to ask clarifications from the Attorney General on specific articles during this one? Because it's about Schedule 3, and I'm grateful for the chair of the scrutiny panel and actually for the Minister also engaging with me because it was good engagement. I just would like to clarify. Schedule 3, 2.c. Why I'm asking this question, as Deputy Barbara Ward asked, I think what's important now is to understand the transitions, and it's to have this clarity for the public as well as for ourselves. From my understanding, with engagement between myself and the Minister and the chair of the scrutiny panel, the moment that fixed term, currently existing fixed term contract finished, a landlord can sign a new fixed term contract. If it's scheduled, I would like to interpretation from the Attorney General just to confirm it if it's correct, and if Schedule 3 2.c does require to give any notifications, and if you don't give notification, you cannot sign new fixed term contract. It can be answered after, can be answered later, whatever is more appropriate for the Attorney General.
Danny?
Could I have a moment to think about that, sir?
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, I can continue with speech. First of all, I think it's
as it mentioned to other speakers, the housing minister had done lots of work with the scrutiny. I know it's not easy, and I know that it was different views, and the housing minister did work with scrutiny and with the assembly to bring as much possible from everyone's perspective to moderate the initial proposal. And I'm grateful for the housing minister and to the scrutiny for this. A couple of questions that I asked housing minister. First of all, what his views about negative equity that currently young families are facing. Young families, or not young families, any islanders who bought property over the last 3 years currently facing negative equity. I didn't receive this answer at my first. I would like to hear this at the end of this debate, because what I stated in my speech, I do worry about Jersey economy. I do worry that prices continue to fall. And I do worry that people who purchase what we call middle Jersey, as Deputy Dubley mentioned, are facing negative equity, will not be able to sell, will not be able to downsize or upsize. It's really serious question for me. I am at the same time content, and I feel it's really important way forward that the Minister agreed as scrutiny suggested to have post-legislative scrutiny. And actually, as Deputy Tadier at the end of his speech, and as I said, if something doesn't work, we need to change, and we might need to change. Another thing, I think it's on page 6, Minister, enaction of these amendments is by ministerial order. So as an assembly, not in this term, and not in next term, we will debate when it will come into force, when it will start to apply. So I would like if Minister can indicate in his closing speech what's his time scale to enact all amendments, part of the amendments, what will be enacted and when, at least approximate schedule, that the public would understand what does it mean in practice, because we do need to enact. I do respect the process, and I think we've gone through the really, really good process. Not easy one, and Assembly got to the decision, and we're in the third reading. I did vote against Article 7 because, personally, I believe there are areas like economy we don't need to interrupt. But this is, like I said, ideological belief, like Deputy Tadier, ideological belief that take from rich, give to poor. And I don't believe that, I'm really, really worried this intervention on rent control, whatever we call stabilization, it's a rent control, will have a negative effect on our economy. But we are here we are, and I'm going to support. And I really, really wish that we can start to speak in less offensive language towards the landlords. They are contributing to our economy. Most of them not are greedy landlords. And when members making political points, we can make political points without offensive language that doesn't help to our Jersey community. It's very, very difficult, and most of the landlords are good landlords. Most of the landlords are not professional landlords. They are contributing, and they are good with their tenants. The offensive language that was during this debate in this assembly towards members of our community who are contributing to the economy, who are contributing to the tax, and who is allowed that people who are less fortunate to receive their benefits and support, they don't need to be called names in this assembly. And it's an important point that I would like to make here, because once we are finishing this debate, and we'll have more debates, and I know that we're all getting very emotional, let's try to be as respectful as possible towards each other and towards the members of the public that are there. So I'm looking for the summing up, and will probably be, well, probably this law will be adopted, and we did do very, very good job with the scrutiny, with Deputy Roden's amendment. I think we're in different place where we started. And I would, if Attorney General would have an answer, it would be helpful.
Attorney, are you ready to respond to the question that Deputy Gardener has asked? Or?
Yes. Just the Deputy was asking a question in relation to existing tenancies, as I understand it, for a specified term, because her question was in relation to paragraph 2.2 little c of Schedule 3. And that paragraph falls under the heading existing tenancies for a specified term. So that is a situation where the landlord and tenant have agreed that a tenancy will last, say, 2 years. It's a fixed term of 2 years. So I think, sir, it's important to read little c of paragraph 2.2 in the context of all of the provisions in paragraphs 2 and 3 of Schedule C, because Schedule 3 does, in my view, provide a comprehensive transitional regime for dealing with specific tenancies, and indeed for periodic tenancies, which I won't deal with, but it also the schedule does cover periodic tenancies as well. So if we look at paragraph 2 of Schedule 3, there's a clear statement in paragraph 2.1. So an existing tenancy for a specified term remains subject to this law as it was immediately before the 2025 amendments came into force. So that tenancy continues even after this new law, this new amending law, comes into force. So that is the starting point. But there is some more detailed provisions in paragraph 2 which amend that starting point, which vary that starting point. So paragraph 2.2a, but the residential agreement, tenancy agreement for the existing term cannot be varied or renewed despite its provisions. Instead, the parties may enter into a new agreement under this law as amended that starts after the existing tenancy ends. So what the parties can't do is to try and amend an existing specified term to get around other provisions in the residential tenancy law. But what paragraph 2.2a does allow them to do is to create a new agreement. So they can enter into a new initial term, which is covered by other provisions earlier in the law. So they can enter into a new initial term, which the law allows up to a period of 3 years in the operative provisions earlier in the law. So they can do that. In paragraph 2b, but if there is a requirement to give notice for the tenancy to end, then that has to be done in accordance with paragraph 3 of Schedule 3, which details how notice is given. And then what the Deputy was specifically concerned with was paragraph C or subparagraph C of paragraph 2. So if after the 2025 amendments came into force, the specified term ends and the tenant continues to occupy the residential unit on the basis of a current period, the existing tenancy becomes a periodic tenancy. So if there is a recurrent period, then that becomes a periodic tenancy, and that will be subject to the provisions concerning periodic tenancies in the law, including the provisions on notice periods. So if a tenant has been in occupation, say, for more than 5 years, then the requirement will become to give notice for 6 months, or with the amendment that the Minister has accepted, I believe a requirement to give notice for 12 months, 12 months notice for no reason. So that is what that particular paragraph, or subparagraph C, that the Deputy has asked me about is concerned with. I appreciate it's a long answer, but I think it's important that the Deputy answer the Deputy's question in relation to all the relevant paragraphs which bear on this issue.
So simplify, if I can, just to clarify, simplify that if the new contract has been signed and not just the tenants continue to live after the initial contract that currently in place finished, so then if the new contract is signed, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does.
No, sir. If a new contract is signed, that becomes subject to an initial term arrangement under the law.
Yeah, sure.
For up to 3 years.
Thank you, it's clear.
Thank you, Attorney. Does anyone wish to speak on the matter in third reading? Deputy Renner, then Deputy Morel. Deputy Renner.
Sir, I would start by reassuring members that I've calmed down since my speech last night. So over the last couple of days, as I cycled along the front to come here, the waves were coming over the wall and there were sheets of spray drenching the cycle path. I was forced to change my route at several points to ensure I got here safely. And I think that's perhaps a small reflection of where we're at here. The Minister has had to change course. He's avoided being drenched on a few occasions by accepting amendments. And I congratulate the Minister and Scrutiny for their constructive engagement to get us this far. But I want to address the reasons why I think we should maintain our support for this legislation. I said in my opening speech, we need to respond to those people, especially the less well-off, whose lived experience is that the system is stacked against them. They look to government for some protection. We need to show that our politics can deliver some tangible improvements to their lives. Otherwise, we will be fueling the anger, frustration, and nihilism that leads people towards political extremes. I want to turn briefly to something that was not debated when we debated the principles, but was introduced when the amendments were considered, which is the economic impact analysis. Incidentally, my understanding is that the report was commissioned by Deputy Scott, and therefore the Minister had no control over whether or when it was released. It's been trumpeted by some as a lethal blow to these reforms because it identifies high costs to the economy, but it is nothing of the sort. It is a reasonable piece of work in its own terms, but it is also a thin piece of work because the analysis is exceptionally narrow. It repeats some standard economic nostrums, but without exploring wider issues, wider context. And of course, there is a different law before us now than the one that was the subject of the economic impact analysis. There is, for example, no word on methodology, so we don't know why some things were considered in the report and others not. But I would just draw attention to a couple of specific points. It doesn't consider the null hypothesis, the costs to the economy of doing nothing. It does not consider how changes in the UK might affect the rental market in Jersey. As the UK adopts much stronger protection for tenants, what effect will a weakly regulated Jersey rental market have on our ability to recruit essential workers? And I have to say, The calculation about the supposed costs of these reforms has a back of a fag packet feel to it. It places a cost on checking contracts to ensure they are compliant with the new legislation, but it doesn't appear to have calculated the marginal cost, because contracts, of course, are always checked before being reissued. In calculating rental returns, it relies only on rental income. When calculating returns for a landlord, it relies only on rental income, when there is not a single property owner I know who does not factor in capital gain as part of their overall return when holding property. Equally, we all know, as property owners, that property is a cyclical business with good years and bad years. A snapshot taken at one point in time is not indicative of the decision-making that most property owners make. I think the truth is that a literal reading of the economic impact analysis is that you would never be able to change the residential tenancy law because there are always going to be some costs. We don't do economic impact analysis, for example, when the minimum wage was introduced. We don't do them for budgets. And that's because it is well understood that policies of this nature have some costs, but also some benefits. And it is exceptionally hard to quantify both sides of the equation. So the balance between the two is essentially political. So we've ended up with a more modest set of amendments to the residential tenancy law than originally proposed. The result is that the changes to the RTL are now much more balanced. If your starting point is that the current law is perfectly balanced, then you won't accept that conclusion. But I do not think that the previous law had magically arrived at the perfect balance in relations between landlord and tenant. This new version advances some significant protection for tenants whilst rowing back on the measures that have attracted the greatest opposition from landlords. The rough edges have been taken off, if you like. We have to thank scrutiny for that, and also the Minister, who perhaps set aside some of the passionate rhetoric of the early summer and engaged in a constructive way with scrutiny and with the Assembly. So let me, if I may, finish with this observation. What we've ended up with is a set of amendments that doesn't give anyone everything they want, but does allow all sides to claim a victory. Some might say that means we have a fudge, but for this politician at least, the compromises feel more like success than failure. Therefore, for me, passing this proposition as amended would be a victory for our democratic process. It would show that we can deliver meaningful change whilst being respectful of all sides in the argument. It is not perfect, but then again, nothing is. It is progress. I'm a landlord, and I very much hope that we pass this legislation.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morel.
Thank you, sir. Listening to previous speakers, a few things do come to mind, and one of them is I agree that it is good to see the Assembly working as it should. I think one of my fears over the last 3 years is a sense of people not understanding what scrutiny is and the value of scrutiny, I'm pleased to see that that is changing, and I thank the panel for their work on this as a result. I also do want to congratulate Deputy Mezek. I think it is really nice to see anyone, and this is just because I like to see people I know being happy, and it is nice to see anyone who works hard at something reaches for compromise in order to get the thing they wish, which is just my firm belief in politics. Anyone who stands there and just says, this is the only way, is almost certainly wrong. And unfortunately, in the critique of Deputy Mezek, he too often does say this is the only way, and therefore I think is often wrong. But in this case has definitely reached out for the views of others, and as a result has reached compromise, which I think makes, in this case, I don't believe is fudge, but is better as a result. But, you know, Deputy Mezek has worked hard, there is no doubt about it, and as a result, Deputy Mezek has got something that he wished to see. And I do congratulate a fellow minister for that, and well done in that respect. I have held my counsel throughout this debate until now. I've said nothing on it, except the odd amendment here and there, but on the main law, I absolutely haven't. And but I do still have concerns. There are no doubt. I do, and this is because I do think about Jersey as an investment proposition. Why would people want to invest in Jersey? Is the thing that goes through my head constantly. And so my concerns in this perspective are particularly around property rights. Jersey's always been a place where property rights are very clearly understood and simply understood. And as a result, that's created a reason for people to wish to invest in Jersey. I am still concerned that this law blurs the realities, blurs property rights, and could therefore have a detrimental effect on people, either people who are already in Jersey seeking to invest more in the island, or people outside the island who look to invest. And obviously, inward investment is something the island always and will always need. I'm pleased that we knocked the rough edges, as Deputy Renner said, off the rent rises, and if I remember rightly, that was due to Deputy Renner's amendment, I think. Nod, please, if that's the case, yes. And I think that is better, but I do still have issues with rent capping. I have, over my 7 years in the States Assembly, really come to the view that Jersey, over the last 30 years, 40 years, however long, government has entered too far into our lives. And what that means is that government decides things for us. And I just think that government, as an organisation, is limited in its capacities, and so is not capable of deciding things for us all the time, especially as we have only a 20% tax rate in itself. That leads to a small government in terms of its actual size. The actual capabilities of that government are clearly restricted. And so I am concerned that, particularly around things like some of the periodic tenancies and the rent capping, this is government moving too far into our lives, deciding things for citizens. And I don't think government should be doing that. We won't know until the future passes and becomes the past, whether this will have any economic impact. That's the truth of it. The economic advisors who provided that assessment, I have no doubt, did it to the best of their ability in a very short period of time with, as the assessment says, very little evidence to work with. But I've no doubt they gave it their best. But no matter what they say, we won't know until time actually passes and we see the impacts of the law. And if things go well, very little will change. If things don't go well, I think we could see, if landlords, as some people have said, landlords may well sell. That could be a boon for people wishing to get on the property ladder, as that would likely cause property prices to fall. But the flip side of that is, if that's landlords selling to people to own or occupy, the flip side of it is you'll have fewer rental properties, and that could see rents rising significantly as a result. Regardless of any rent capping in here, the market will prevail, I can always promise in that respect. So, where one side goes, prices fall, it will be a seesaw, the other side will go up. And the reason I say that is because there is only one thing, there are two things, and only two things, that will bring both property prices and rents down in this island. Only two things. And that is basically increasing the amount of housing on this island through increasing the supply on this island. No matter how many residential tenancy laws, no matter how many help to buy schemes, all you are doing, as far as pricing is concerned, is playing with the edges. Two things that will bring the price down. We build more units of accommodation on this island, or we build a fixed link to the continent where people are able to live off the island and come in. They are the only two things that will do that. We have the choice over the years which way we want to go, but it is true that the only way you can bring prices down on both sides of that seesaw are ultimately linked to supply and demand. You either remove demand by helping people live elsewhere and work here, or you increase supply. That's the only things that will happen, and no amount of legislation will change that. And that brings me slightly to another point, which is I do feel sometimes that politicians always feel that laws will make a difference. And it's like, we don't solve the world's ills through laws. I can promise you. Policies and strategies and working together, which is exactly what the Minister's done here, will do that. The other thing I'm not keen on this is I do worry about government officers being seen more and more as regulators, as police in themselves. And this is linked to government coming into our lives too much. I really do worry about that. I think it puts them in a really difficult position. And if people want to understand why, one of the reasons people don't like government, it's because government becomes the arbiter, the police of our own lives. Outside of the criminal, which obviously does need to be policed, I have no issue with that, but we create these pockets of regulation in government where government officers suddenly can tell you what to do. You know, again, I grew up in the 70s, 80s and 90s when communism was in full flow and where governments were using those things actively against their populations. Now, I don't expect that ever to happen here in Jersey, but the thing is in a malicious way. But what happens is that as government has more and more policing roles, people will hate government more and more. It's a really simple fact. And I think these are things that we should be aware of. So to that, sir, as far as this is concerned, this is a more modest draft. That is correct. There are still some fundamental problems in my mind with it about the rights of individuals on this island and how this butts up against them. So I am likely to maintain my non-support for this, but I will continue to listen to members. But despite my non-support, I can still see a good piece of work in terms of the effort and the passion with which Deputy Mezek has worked on this. And I really do congratulate him for that effort and that passion, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Sullivan.
Yes, sir, and I rise to speak briefly because after 2.5 days, I think we've just about run out of everything we could be possibly saying. But I'm reminded, and it actually feel quite, what's the word? Perhaps it's joyful even, joyful about the process that I've just witnessed, which is the effective use of scrutiny and the listening of a minister to what scrutiny has said, which has effectively worked as it should do. Now, when I first started doing scrutiny some while back, near 20 years, what used to standardly happen was that we'd produce a report full of recommendations, 14 recommendations as to how we might proceed, and then ministers would regularly put a cold blanket on it and forget it, try and bury it. That's what used to happen regularly. Scrutiny was ineffective. I've just seen scrutiny being highly effective in arriving at the conclusions it's come to, which has involved the minister actually taking some compromise, saying, I can't have everything I want, but at least I can bring this, and this will be an improvement. And that minister has been congratulated, absolutely, for listening, cooperating with the scrutiny process, and scrutiny has my praise for doing exactly what it should, which is to go in quite minute detail about how the system might operate. So congratulations to all around. It's rare for me to do that, but I think it's deserved.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. So this isn't about whether the legislation is right or wrong. I voted positively for all the amendments This is a timing issue. This is a perception issue. I fully respect the huge effort we on scrutiny and the Housing Minister's team have put into updating this law. I remind members that no matter how they vote, the 2011 law remains in place with all its protections. I recognise it's not perfect, but this is ultimately about the wider risk to our economy. The negative equity points raised by Deputy Gardner and Deputy Doublé are very valid. So I make no apology for repeating a part of my speech from a couple of days ago, as I am hugely concerned about the uncertainty and lack of an impact assessment that the legislation may have on our economy. We seem to be getting into the habit in this assembly of putting the economy on the back burner, as if it were a nice thing to have. I despair when ministers have to have their arms twisted when it comes to issues such as apprenticeship pay, because they simply don't understand how the economy functions, how markets function, have no idea that markets need certainty. The following was posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, and I quote, "Just a quick count of sales, and currently out of about 40 sales instructions, some 16 properties are previously tenanted properties, which the landlord or vendor has decided to sell. None of these properties is in a bad state. They're all kept in good state and let for a long time, sometimes for long-term tenants. The vendors have decided to sell. Generally, the leases come to a natural end. Most are fed up with being vilified by a government which has done so much damage." These are the realities when uncertainty creeps into the market. This is happening in real time. The market isn't waiting for feedback. It isn't going to wait for a couple of years for data. It's reacting to the evidence in front of it now. This has real impact now on people's lives. Deputy Balash described approving this legislation as playing with fire. That's what we're doing here, playing fast and loose with our economy, simply because there seems to be a complete antipathy towards collecting relevant data. I simply remind members of the following. If landlords decide to remove properties from the rental market and either use them as holiday lets or leave them vacant, this would lead to a reduction in the supply of properties to rent, which in turn will lead to less choice for tenants and could lead to rents being increased by more than they otherwise would have, e.g. rents not covered by the rent stabilisation measures. Some landlords may be deterred from investing in more additional buy-to-let properties, and some potential landlords may be deterred from entering the buy-to-let market. This will reduce demand in the housing market, which in the short term could affect the viability of new developments and thus affect both the supply of rental properties and also the supply of homes for private purchase. Neither outcome is desirable. Fewer new developments or slower rate at which developments take place could affect the supply of new homes for islanders, which in turn will have an effect on Jersey's economy. There are likely to be unintended consequences to Jersey's economy too, because the residential tenancy law does not evidence the problem or the scale of the problems it is correcting. It is not possible to assess whether, on balance, these amendments offer a net benefit to Jersey's economy. I refuse to endorse any legislation that could put our economy in jeopardy, creates uncertainty in the minds of investors. Yes, we are talking about people's homes, but we need individuals and businesses who will invest in property to provide homes. They too need certainty. I fully respect the attempt to tighten up the existing legislation. However, there is a timing issue here. Our economy is in a fragile place. How does bringing legislation that has been described as a sledgehammer to crack a nut help anyone at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Tom Binney.
Sir, I hadn't intended to say anything, but I think as a fellow minister who's voted against this proposition, I owe the Assembly and the general public a very short explanation as to where I stand. I'd made a few notes as to what I was going to say, but I think I can sum it up by saying that I think Deputy Morel summarised virtually everything I had to say. Strangely enough, there were a number of comments made by Deputy Southern that I think were quite laudable, and very much support what Deputy War has had to say, and I think we do well to listen to that. So rather than harp on about anything, I think I'm going to make a serious point. Whether it's just perception or otherwise, I think this is going to cause a dent to this particular sector. And I think that whilst we want to do what we're doing here, we also have to be proactive. And I'm risking my neck here, and apologies to the Chief Minister and Treasury Minister, but I'm going to say that the removal of the 3% surcharge on second properties, it's high time that was removed, and I hope that throughout the budgetary process this Assembly finds a way of doing that, because at least it will send a message to the sector that we're not completely deaf and that we are prepared to take some measures that actually help the market to pick up again, because as Deputy Morel said, supply in this instance really is the answer. The more properties there are, the more choice a tenant has. I've discussed this proposition a couple of times with the Minister, and I think we have very similar objectives, slightly different methods perhaps, but I hope that that plea doesn't go unnoticed as we go through to the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm inclined to speak, particularly following the Constable of St Mary. He and I have sat on scrutiny panels before, and when he talks of work in scrutiny, I sit up and take notice, and I was very pleased to hear his speech, and it made me think. I don't necessarily agree with all his outcomes, but I too am one who's grateful for the work that scrutiny have done on this review, and he was part of that work. The Constable of St John, his next door neighbour, spoke of the content and how important it is that we look at the content of what we have in front of us now. But for me, intent rather than content is more important here. And the policy intent was sold to us as something which is going to be better for landlords and for tenants. But I fear, sir, that eventually we will see that the intent here has always been to help tenants more than landlords. It's true to say there are things in here for both sides, but to use an extreme analogy, there's nothing we can put in place to help landlords when they turn up at a property they own after a few weeks or months of non-rent payment to find that the door is open, the property is empty, and the tenant has disappeared away from the island. But getting back to the content, I'm afraid that I see more red tape, I see more rules, and that may well be the intent of the Minister, and it's an inevitable end game for work that we're doing here. Many have spoken about the possibility of landlords leaving the market and selling, and some have spoken about the state of the market at the moment when it comes to selling and the difficulties of selling at the price that vendors would wish to receive. I know firsthand that some people have decided not to sell, but they have told me yesterday that they intend to go to a management company and have their property rented out through that company, causing them more cost, more hassle, and getting away from the informal and friendly relationship they have with their tenant. They worry about the future, but they know that if they have their property rented to a management company, all the rules will be complied with, but at the same time they will say apply an RPI increase on an annual basis, something which they don't currently do. In that case, where is the benefit for either landlord or tenant? The tenant will get more of an increase than they might have done otherwise. The landlord gets more work to do and more payments to make. Nevertheless, I'll just make a couple more comments about RPI. I'm not in favour of government intervening in marketplaces, and I never have been. But rent is one cost that tenants face. Others might be electricity, water, insurance. How would those people feel if we instructed the electricity company or the water company that they could not increase their prices by more than RPI in the face of huge investment, in both cases, electricity and water, that would cause them serious problems? As I just said, sir, I am against the principle of rent control. I really feel that this law, as good as it is in some places, is introducing something which I just can't agree with, and that's the principle of government intervening with the amount of rent that can be charged. And for that reason, sir, I cannot agree to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else want to speak in third reading? Deputy Rob Ward.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'll try and bring a little bit more positivity to the day. We were so positive. I'd like to start off by saying again about scrutiny, because I think it is important that we point out the really important role that scrutiny has taken on there. And it was pleased to hear, and let me remind people, because I think, you know, the previous speaker seemed to question the intentions of the minister, when what the minister has clearly demonstrated, and indeed it has been said in this assembly by members from across the assembly, that he's been willing to compromise and actually do a proper job with scrutiny, and scrutiny have done a proper job with the minister, which is exactly what we aspire to across the assembly. We've had a very long debate. We've talked about all of the articles. They've been agreed. We're now in third reading. And it is clear that ideologically, some members of this assembly simply will not vote for this. They were not ever going to from the beginning, because I think, and they've therefore not taken into account what the actual law actually says and the reality of it. I'd like to thank the Constable of St Lawrence, actually, sir, because yesterday, I have to be honest now, so I'm a very honest man. I did, when the Constable said, oh, can we have a print out of this? I thought, oh, no. But actually, when I went away, it did help. It helped a lot, and I thank her for that, because I looked at it last night and I thought, I understand all of that, but it's like a gestalt thing. The sum is more than the total of the parts. You have to understand when the things go together. So it gave me some clarity. It also gave me some reassurance. And I'd like to just mention a few things for that and the reasons why I'd support this. And I would urge other members to support it. So this is a step towards fairness. It is a step towards transparency. And it's a step towards stability, because everybody knows where they are. That's a really important part for any market, stability. And we seem to be forgetting that in the sort of ideological, above the sound of ideologies clashing, sir, we might get to some reality in where we are. Housing isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And we're a very advanced, modern island where that standard of housing, I don't think there's anyone in this assembly would want to been so negative about Jersey to say that they would accept poor housing. And I think we're talking Jersey down a little bit here at times with where we are, but let's try and be positive, sir. Some of the transformative changes that are in here, sir, about the rent increases linked to RPI, which was accepted as an amendment. I have to remind members, and I remind the Constable of Greville, but there are exemptions for specific criteria. Significant improvement to homes if rents have fallen below market rates. That is a built-in protection for landlords. That's a tangible, real built-in protection for landlords. And regards to rent tribunal, sir, I think a rent tribunal is long overdue. I think the previous minister talked about rent tribunals. They never happened. We're now at the point of actually applying and doing. And it's that point of doing that is so important in politics and as an assembly. They do allow disputes to be resolved fairly. And if you look at, I won't quote it from the part of the law that says about setting up the rent tribunal is very important because it asks for the right people to be there. Qualified people, legally qualified people who know about housing, have experience in that. So the decisions will be made based around the law and they will be detached from bias, which is really important for tenant and landlord. There's clarity there. So I think that's a really big step forward. And there are members here who, for a long time, would support tribunals elsewhere, employment tribunals, for example. But when we come to a rent tribunal, might be due to the ideologies, again, the sound of those ideologies getting in the way of where we are, it seems we can't support a rent tribunal. I think it's a positive thing. There are clear termination rules. And in terms of arbitrary, let's call them arbitrary evictions, okay? And the idea was, well, we don't know how many. By definition, we won't know how many. By definition, we won't. And I've said before, if people are saying, well, we don't want any controls over that, you have to ask yourself, how many of those will you allow? How many for you is okay? How many individuals or families being given an arbitrary eviction from somewhere and having to have their lives disrupted is okay for you? For me, it's not okay. I can't look people in the eyes and say, I think that's okay for you to go through that. I think we need to be much more positive than that. And this law does that. It stops that happening. And for that reason, it's not anti-landlord. That rhetoric that has been talking about, I haven't heard the lambasting of landlords here. I've been repeatedly, these are the things that will support landlords in this law. The scrutiny panel will brought those things. They consulted on that. There was wide consultation on that. And so I don't recognise that in this, and that's why we've got to a position where I think across the Assembly we've got so much agreement and so much positive. So I want to try and address some of the economic issues here, supposed economic issues. So when tenants feel secure, they spend more confidently in the local community. They can plan their incomes. They know what their costs are going to be. They can say, you know, I can go out once a month to eat. They can put money into the local economy. That's a really important point. A point of economy, seeing as the economic issues seem to be a bit more about feel than actual real information, because they're not there, they will do that. And that's a really important thing to do. And in turn supports local businesses. And that's where we want their money spent, in local businesses. The rent tribunal reduces litigation costs, saving time and money for landlords, tenants and the courts. The courts are incredibly expensive and not accessible to a lot of people. Therefore, they won't be necessary. The rent tribunal will solve those problems. That saves money. And requirements, we talked about data, but this is the first time we've got a data-driven requirement for landlords to record data on rents, which enables better policy making way into the future. And with accurate market insights, target housing support more effectively, and plan future developments more wisely. So there is a product of this, which is way beyond that, which is very positive for our economy. Very positive looking forward. We seem to be forgetting that. And also, this encourages responsible investment. By setting fair rules, we attract responsible investors who value long-term returns over short-term exploitation or gain. This helps professionalise the rental sector and improves housing quality. That is a stable, effective, modern market. And for the free marketeers who say, well, we shouldn't have any regulation, surely that's what they want. A market that is based upon good basis that regulates itself. You know, we can have arguments about that, which would be quite nice over a cup of tea, but for this, that's where we'll end up. And so we're talking about protecting tenants, which in the end, I think, addresses productivity. When workers have secure housing, they are more productive, less stressed, and more likely to stay in Jersey, supporting our workforce and our economy. Those soft links, and I don't think they're that soft to be quite frank, sir, to the economy are really important. That firm basis that you can build a career in Jersey with. The Constable Grill talked about his family. I'm in a position my daughter's leaving Jersey, partly because of the the expense of living here, and she wants to see other things, and she's coming home to live for a while, and we'll save thousands of pounds when she comes home because we won't charge her to live there, and then she'll have some money to start herself elsewhere, away from Jersey. She's done everything right. Gone to university, studied, come back, has worked here, pays her taxes. Now, we have to address this. And these aren't draconian in any way. These are about building a really sensible approach to our housing, which I think will help in the long future. So, and the idea of responsible landlords, I think the vast majority of landlords are responsible. They recognise it's a home that's being rented out. And therefore, there is a relationship with responsibility. These amendments promote stability for them, not restriction. Ethical landlords who value steady returns will thrive in a fairer, more transparent system. They won't have to compete with unscrupulous landlords who do whatever they fancy at the time and give them a bad name. It's as simple as that. And from the people that I talk to, well, I think we can all come up with anecdotal stories about a few people that we speak to, but we don't have massive insights across. But anyway, move on. So this reform, sir, I would suggest filters out what one might call exploitative practice, not genuine housing providers. And I think it was mentioned before that people have said that that is not what they're seeing from people who are coming to talk to them. And if landlords do exit because they don't want to take that positive approach, then it opens the market for a renewal. And a market renewal is not a threat, it's a sign of progress. We might get some renewal to the market with the standards that we want and make things better for how young people when they live here. Stable rents, better tenants, reduced turnover, lower maintenance costs, benefit landlords in the long run. These things work together to fit. So I've gone along, I know we've had a long day. But I really want to be clear that I think the economic arguments are scaremongering, and I think we've heard them so many times from people. Let's get above those ideologies. Let's look at the fact that this is a decent piece of work that's been done by the Minister with scrutiny and across this Assembly. I think it was somebody who said, let's look at what's actually happening here, not the personalities involved who's bringing it. It's moved on from this. It's been really good work and a long time in the making, and some incredible work by the officers that have been involved, because this is not easy. So I think we're at a point now, we've had the debate, we've gone through, and I really urge members to support this in third reading. Let's move forward and we can come out with something very positive at the end of this sitting, that I think the vast majority of this island will be very, very pleased to see us doing. So I completely can support this, and I will be supporting it in third reading. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor and Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I wouldn't wish to repeat any matters which others have extolled at length, but my points really are over the potential consequences of accepting this law. Many Jersey landlords are not sophisticated experts, and I worried that the proposed measures will have the effect of scaring them off into disposing of the property. Will they have to resort to management companies to take advice as to what they should or shouldn't do? I suspect they will, sir. Effectively, they wish, most small landlords wish to comply with the law. They don't want to have to circumvent any regulations which we may put before them. I think the problem is we don't quite know what the consequential effects may be. There's very little data. There's little data as regards, as has been mentioned, why properties have been disposed of. Have they been disposed of because they are rental properties or just through changed family circumstances? There are lots of reasons why people have a rental property. Have they inherited it? Have they actually saved up and bought it for themselves? Have they bought it as a buy-to-let proposition? and we don't know this. And actually, that's to pick up a point from that the Health Minister made a bit earlier. Without the data applying to buy-to-let properties or the knowledge, should we be actually following the proposal set, which may reduce the stamp duty on that? So, sir, in simple terms, my apprehension regarding us passing the proposition remains. But I'm very grateful for the work which has been done by the scrutiny panel and the Minister for conceding various elements, which serves to potentially soften the blow, if I can use those words, to the proposed law as such. So I look forward to hearing the conclusion of the Minister in his summing up, and hoping that he will assure me that increased interference by government in our lives is a good thing, rather than the converse. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable. Does anyone else wish to speak in this debate in third reading? Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. This debate's been a lot about principles versus the detail. Of course, our principles are important. Our political principles are important, but also so is the detail, so is good law. So I understand that the challenges, the difficulties in juxtapositioning some of our principles in the law cannot always lead to the right conclusions. And I think we have to get back and think about what we're trying to do here. The housing landscape, the housing market, has been a blight of concern and worry for many years, probably decades. The affordability of homes, the security of homes, especially for the less well-off in our society, has been a major factor. I remember the struggles I went through to afford to buy a home 30-odd years ago. It's only got harder for youngsters now to do that. And when are we going to wake up to this? When are we going to understand that, as I said before, if we do what we've always done, we will get what we've always got? And here in front of us, we have a real opportunity to make improvements. So the draft residential tenancy amendment law before us represents a measured and balanced and necessary step towards strengthening our legal framework for rented homes. If adopted, it will fill a clear commitment that this Assembly made to improve the arrangements for tenants and landlords, and to help address the wider pressures within our housing system. And I haven't heard any argument that it will not do that. The arguments have been largely about principles, and there's no one with more of a principle, as my colleagues will know, in relation to free market economy and reduction in regulation. But there are areas that this island, this Assembly of Government, have significantly overregulated, and there are areas that need, dare I say it, some more helpful regulation or some legislation to ensure those markets are working properly for us. The need for action is plain. Jersey is experiencing challenges that, if left unchecked, threaten our social cohesion, our economic resilience, and perhaps most important of all, our demographic sustainability. We've heard a lot of criticism or claims that this is going to severely damage our economy. Well, it is not going to seriously damage our economy. Economics are basically best addressed when we look at longer-term solutions, and the biggest threat, and the Economic Development Minister isn't here, but he will recognise it's his piece of work. Our biggest risk to this island, to our economic well-being, is working-age population, a falling birth rate. We know, sir, that many hundreds of young islanders are leaving the island to seek better lives elsewhere. Better, sir, because they can find more affordable homes to bring up families than they can here. And let me just give some examples about how an affordable, secure housing market is crucial to Jersey's economy. Attracting a workforce, affordable housing helps attract and retain diverse workforce, including essential workers, people working in our health and education services. Economic stability, when residents have access to affordable, secure housing, they are more likely to spend money in the local economy, contributing towards economic growth and stability. Reducing inequality, providing affordable housing can help reduce social inequality. Ensuring that lower income families have access to stable living conditions, which can lead to improved educational and health outcomes. Supporting local business, so a stable population with secure housing supports local businesses, as residents are more likely to shop locally and engage in community activities. Investment in our infrastructure. A stable and affordable housing market will lead to improvement in local infrastructure, including transportation, schools and public services. So that's all work that is part, the foundations are laid in the common strategic plan that this Assembly agreed. Overall, sir, secure and affordable housing, not just to buy, but to rent, is a foundational element that supports economic growth and well-being, sir. Now, we know there will be a one-off cost to landlords and possibly tenants, and that's been estimated at something like 7,000 hours of admin costs, maybe changing agreements, which split among, 13,000, 14,000 tenancies in the private sector, whatever that figure is not a lot, but there's a one-off cost, sir. And I maintain that the benefits of working towards creating a more secure and affordable housing market, sir, is far more beneficial to our economy, dealing with the longer-term economic strategy that's been presented, than a short-term impact, which is outweighed at the moment. I mean, the real and only impact we're seeing on our housing markets are due to interest rates and other geopolitical conditions leading to higher inflation. That's where the real challenges are coming from. And we've already proven that by increasing the supply, which is starting to happen, and that's gaining momentum, together with schemes to get people into their own homes, have been very popular. I want to join members in thanking Landlords Association and Scrutiny and all members and ministers for putting a lot of work into this. As other members have said, it's an example of a collaboration, and I join others in recommending the compromises that have been made from all quarters. And importantly, sir, following those discussions, what we have in front of us now lays the groundwork for a better understanding of our rental sector overall. And for the first time, going back to the economic argument, because the advice we have is inconclusive, because there's no data to base it on. For the first time, we will collect reliable data on actual rents charged, which will be absolutely vital in how we might improve this law even further into the future, sir. As I mentioned when we had the debate some time ago, half of all households in Jersey live in rented homes. Roughly speaking, it's 54%, I think, home ownership. As in line with other jurisdictions, I think I would like to see that increase. I'd like to see more young families go into home ownership. But I still like to see a very successful and viable private rental sector working alongside that. And sometimes, if you see a rebalancing, sometimes you take some rental houses out, they are purchased, then you could see a healthier rental market on the back of that as the housing stock itself rebalances. But as roughly half of our islanders live in rented accommodation, it's fair to say that probably half of our children and young people live in rental accommodation. And we must remember our duty to care in those sectors. And it's important, members will know from working with the Children's Commission how important it is as part of the work we're doing with children and young people to provide stable homes. But still so too many children are growing up in homes where there is uncertainty about the future of the type of housing their family can afford into the future. So the law we have before us today, if accepted, will create a pathway that will help children by giving the families the stability they need and the confidence to stay with us and plan for the future. It will bring predictability to rents. It will allow families to plan and invest in the future. It will give islanders, especially young people, the confidence they need to believe they have a good future here. So good landlords have absolutely nothing to fear. Landlords in my family and friends, all of them have absolutely no problem with this at all. The vast majority of landlords won't see any differences because they are adhering to some of these rules, and they go even further in some instances. It is the landlords that don't, the landlords that aren't so good, the very few landlords that may seek to exploit or take advantage of tenants that will be brought into line reasonably by this legislation. I think we've had a number of days of debate. I know the vote is very close. I'd ask this Assembly to remember its responsibility to islanders. This is not, this is a sensible and balanced piece of legislation, despite some of the good debate we've had, some of the strong rhetoric we've had around some of the arguments. It is a strong and balanced piece of legislation that's been very well scrutinised. We've come to a compromise. So I really do urge members, I urge my colleagues, my ministers and assistant ministers in the Council of Ministers. It's been difficult for us as a government because we are divided on it, and we are falling back in this position to the democracy of this Assembly. So I urge members, I really do urge members to please help to boost the confidence, put confidence back in our housing market, build confidence for our young people, and pass this legislation, sir, so we can start on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Does anyone else wish to speak? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. It's been an interesting third reading, sir, and you've been extremely lenient in your interpretation of standing orders, but we would expect nothing other than that from you, sir, of course. I imagine one comment from a member of Reform Jersey has got the Minister a little bit concerned, because I've always been ever so slightly confused since in the United Kingdom we've seen the emergence of a political party called Reform, which has got really no foundations in common with Reform Jersey, but we heard this morning that one member of Reform has absolute confidence in the market, and he was starting to sound as though perhaps he was edging towards policy positions of Reform in the United Kingdom. No doubt the Minister will have to deal with that after this sitting. And the reason I was surprised about that was because even I, who is a free marketeer, recognises that the free market only works within what I think of as a Judeo-Christian framework, where there are safeguards appropriately in place. And we find ourselves, as other members have said, with a law in front of us which is actually quite different from the one that was initially presented and debated in the original debate of the principles back in before the summer recess. And I think I said in some of the commentary yesterday that we do find ourselves now with the accepted amendments, particularly when it comes to rent control and tenancy agreements, with what can be described as best practice in the marketplace. I have done my best throughout this debate to seek to have rent control removed altogether from this legislation for all of the reasons I've articulated. It's slightly disappointing to me that some colleagues seek to poo-poo economic assessments and undermine economic assessments, because this Assembly must take into account all of the evidence that is presented, and to my mind, that economic assessment is an important part of the data that we've got in front of us. Because economic assessments are based on what the future implications might be, and the future implications in regard to this legislation, of course, is driven by human actions, and it's quite difficult to second guess what human actions might be in light of any particular piece of legislation. And so I do, because this is what we've seen elsewhere, I do think that this legislation will lead to the more corporatisation of the rental market in Jersey. For some people, they may think that is a good, positive thing. It will, of course, be good news for agents, but then good landlords are already using agents, either in the drafting of their contracts or the finding of their tenants, the vetting of their tenants, all of those things already. And of course, it's a case for lawyers of heads they win, tails they win as well, because there's a new piece of legislation, and again, good landlords will consult their lawyers to make sure that they are complying with this change in legislation. And so I find myself in third reading really hoping that there is a recognition in this Assembly, and therefore in the wider community, that this won't have a terrible detrimental economic impacts to our economy, but it will have effects upon our economy. And as the economic impact assessment said, we can't be absolutely sure what those will be. Will it have impacts upon the number of rental properties available in Jersey? Well, some landlords have told us that they will exit the market, and we've heard other evidence, but we can't be absolutely certain, because again, corporates might pick up those who might pick up some of those properties and run them in a different way. We don't know that. But if those things do happen, then tenants won't see the benefits either that have been ascribed to this legislation. What they will see, those tenants who are already with those landlords who are practicing like this already, in effect, they will see very little change. They will see an annual increase in line with inflation, which is already today in lots of people's contracts. As I think, as I said yesterday, what really does worry me, though, is those tenants right now who have no contract. That worries me. And those tenants who don't feel empowered to have a dialogue with their landlord. And I don't see anything in this legislation that deals with that. But what that does suggest to me is that there does need to be, and I'm not sure how the Minister is going to deal with this, there does need to be more compliance work, because it should not be in today's society that tenants in Jersey don't have a contract. Okay, sometimes contracts take a little bit longer than when one has moved in to actually be delivered. But as a general per se, people should not be going in a situation without contracts. So I think there's questions about compliance. So we can say there's no additional red tape or no additional bureaucracy because the burden to change the contract is placed on the landlord, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there will need to be end up being better policing, not only of this approach, but the existing requirements within the law on landlords. I suppose the reason I do or am concerned about a contraction in the rental market, if that is to take place or does take place, and as we say, we can't be absolutely certain that it might. The reason I'm concerned about that is because we have other housing and controls in place, which means that those people who come to our community are not empowered to buy in the marketplace. They have no choice but to be in rental accommodation. And we might find that actually, as this law takes effect, we have to revisit some of those issues and situations as well. And so I suppose having fought the introduction of rent controls within this piece of legislation, I do want to say to landlords, and I think that the forgotten what they call themselves now, Jersey Landlords Association, there's some up in the gallery. I hope that as this law passes, because I think it will today, I hope that they will feel empowered to work with the Minister and his officials. If he's not doing it, we can see they're just sat along the gallery from him, so they can start that work as soon as the vote's taken place, to seek to send a message to their members and to landlords that there is a way through this and that they should maintain their property, and because they are doing a good for the community. Providing rental accommodation when we have legislation and controls in place that say people have to come to Jersey and rent, private landlords are doing a good for the community, and we shouldn't forget that. And I know that most members don't. So landlords that are currently raising their rents by RPI every year, and all landlords want to maintain their tenants in place because that's what the income stream is, and that's what allows them to provide the funding for repairs and the return and all those things. They will be able to continue, and they will, to some extent, maybe in some cases, benefit from extended tenancies for all the reasons that we know are in the law. And I also think there's comfort for some of those landlords in that there is now the amendment that allows for a 12-month notice period without condition that wasn't there before. I think that's also an improvement. So you're wondering which way I'm going to go, having voted against virtually everything up until this point. But I just want to put some of that into context. It is a different law from the one that was initially lodged. I don't think it will do all the things that some members think or have articulated they think it will do, nor do I think now in its current state is it quite as terrible as it was initially. I personally fundamentally don't think that rent control is a good intervention in the market, but I've lost those arguments now on 3 or 4 occasions, as with others, during the course of this debate. And that's where we find ourselves. I think the Minister and I are often opposed ideologically to issues, but I can see that he has been pragmatic in the acceptance of amendments, even on the floor of the Assembly, to improve the law, because as the Conitable of St John said earlier, there are some good things in this law, which we would want to keep. And so I find myself in third reading, ultimately still not being happy with rent control, but not necessarily wanting to block the good things. We'll have to wait and see which way my finger wobbles. My finger wobbles when the voting is open, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak in third reading? I ask the Minister to reply. Oh, Deputy Kovacs, you wish to speak. Deputy Kovacs.
Thank you. Sir, we are voting today on the final amended tenancy law. I am even more reassured now, with all the constructive amendments passed. This law is balanced and measured. It protects tenants while respecting landlords, with the main concerns highlighted during scrutiny addressed to the amendments. I believe this law does not weaken our traditions, it strengthens them. A fair contract in our tradition is one where both sides have proportionate, balanced rights and responsibilities, and in my opinion, this law brings it. No one denies the important contribution landlords make to our housing system. The many landlords who provide safe, well-maintained homes and support our communities, often going above and beyond to make housing work for everyone, like my landlord, deserve recognition. They should generally have no reason to worry or see changes in the way they operate as a result of this law passing. At the same time, we must be honest. There are also landlords who fail to meet their responsibilities, sometimes intentionally, and tenants need protection to ensure their homes remain safe and secure. And to say that all those proved lived experiences of tenancy problems highlighted in speeches during the debate don't exist, and there's no clear data on how many, is disrespectful. For even more reassurance, I want to clarify that what we are voting on today does not include the civil penalty regime or the detailed rules of the rent tribunal. Those will come later through secondary legislation. There will be full scrutiny, full debate, and full assembly involvement before any of that comes into place. Members should feel confident there is plenty of time to shape those details. To say this framework creates bureaucracy or burdens landlords with red tape is simply wrong. Landlords are understandably worried because of false information being spread on and on. People may reasonably disagree on the balance of property rights, but our debate should be based on truth, not exaggerated claims about red tape that don't exist. In reality, the framework creates no extra paperwork, no permissions, no fees, and no new dealings with the government whatsoever. The existing tenancy will continue the same until the contract expires and smooth transition is considered in the law. What the law establishes is clear, passive standards that function in the background. It is not red tape, it is reason. We are also being told repeatedly about the supposed £300 per year extra cost for landlords if this passes. Did anyone ask what is this considered for? I did. It's a theoretical cost estimated for the time landlords might spend familiarizing themselves with the new laws. Would you not expect in any job with any new law to read what's new? But there's just reading it, understanding it, and that's it. Perhaps after reading it, they will see that this law is far less worrying than the misinformation, intentional or not, has made it seem. The Minister has also promised that clear guidance will be published on the changes, and I'm sure anyone can continue to contact the Housing Department for any information or advice they need. What is at stake today is something simple but vital: giving tenants more stability and security in their homes, protecting the most vulnerable who can't stand up for themselves in unfair situations on both sides, without stripping landlords of a fair return on their investment. This is not extreme, it is reasonable, it is responsible, it is the right next step. As someone once said, the strength of a community is measured by the safety of its home. Let's give people who don't own their home that security too, and do so fairly, reasonably, and together. Because at the end of the day, a home is not just a building. It's where memories are made, where families grow, and where communities thrive. Let's make sure our law protects all of that. Please support this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. Can I thank members for all of their contributions and their resilience through what's been a long and at some points complicated debate. And sir, can I thank you for chairing this and the GREF team for all of their work and advice and helping us know where we are along the way. And of course too, sir, to the Attorney General for his help when members have had technical questions. And there are some more people who I'll thank, but I'll save that for a little bit later, sir.
Because of the process that we've gone through in the last few days, we now have a law that is stronger than where we started. And I am so grateful to those who brought those amendments to help us get there, to all of those who provided me with advice and counsel along the way, including the Chief Minister, who's been supportive of this throughout, and I am grateful to him for that. And I hope members will recognise the fact that I have moved around on some of these issues and listened to members, trying to be accommodating in the interests of progress, and that is pragmatism over purity, to maximise our chances of getting the best outcome for the island at the end of this. Sir Scrutiny did an outstanding job, and listening to the chair of the panel's speech just before, I almost wished I could have delegated this closing speech to her because of how clear and comprehensive she was. But we've now landed at a package that works. It's not a Frankenstein law, or a zombie law, or vampire law, or xenomorph law, or any other thing we may have risked along the way. And when we get to this part of the debate, of course, I accept that most members will have made up their minds, and so I will, I think, attempt some final comments at maybe anyone who remains with any misgivings. And I would say to those that we do have a balanced piece of legislation before us, having been enhanced along the way by those amendments. And it is noticeable that even in the last point of this debate, when those who did speak against it did so, they were still not citing specific provisions and changes that gave them reasons to feel negative. It was all big picture, holistic, rather than what actual provision they think would be harmful. And I think the reason for that is because when you look at the proposed detail and what changes come into force as a result, they're actually pretty modest. No new forms, no new fees, no new permissions. The proposed enhancements to tenants' rights are balanced with enhancements to landlords' rights too. So I do want to say, sir, to Deputy Howell, who mentioned a landlord she'd spoken to in tears, that obviously I feel bad about that. I don't want anybody to feel anxiety or worry over this. The only tears that I am working towards, sir, are my own, hopefully with happiness, if this is adopted. And there is a serious risk of that, sir. But what I would say to deputies and constables who meet these people at their constituency surgeries, please feel free to send those people to me, because I will do everything I can to reassure them. So I remember early on in this process, I had a brief interaction with a landlord who came up to say hello to me at the yacht club. This gentleman approached me. He was perfectly nice and polite, but he said to me, you know, he recognised who I was and what I was doing and wished me luck, but said that he wouldn't be supporting the rent proposals because he and his wife owned a rental property, and they intended later on in their life that they would move into that property when it became appropriate for them in their later years. And if my proposals went through, they wouldn't be able to do that, and so they'd have to think about selling. And so I got to say to this landlord, well, actually, there is a very clear provision in what I'm proposing that says you will be able to issue notice to your tenant in that circumstance because you're using it for yourself, and I'm absolutely crystal clear about that. And this landlord looked at me and he went, oh, right, okay, brilliant, we'll crack on then. So it literally took me 30 seconds to reassure this person who was worried, and we will see more and more of that if the law is adopted. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the economic impact assessment email because Deputy Renouf, I think, said most of what needed to be said on it, but just to say to members that that was not my document, I didn't commission it, and I didn't see it until late in the day, and I've got plenty of questions about it too, including all of the stuff that was missing from it. Most importantly, an examination of the counterfactual, the do-nothing option, and what impact leaving those loopholes open in our law and having our framework for renting falling behind our competitor jurisdictions will have, and the prospect of our young workers feeling the need to leave the island in search of a better life elsewhere. But I will highlight to members the document that I sent round on Tuesday morning, 28 pages long, comprehensive, and published in the public domain, which was done during the policy development stage, where it ought to be, rather than a retrospective look at proposals I'd already committed to for predetermined ideological reasons. That economic exercise was done specifically to inform my proposals, and I did move my positions as a result of the advice that we got through that, which I think is the right way to do things. So if this law is adopted in third reading, I will do everything I can to make it work. There are still bits that will need to come to the Assembly, and I will engage with members and with scrutiny to get all of those things right. And that will, at some point, when that's done, lead to an enactment of the law, which this gets at Deputy Gardner's question, which I would love to be in a position to do it before the end of this term, but if that's not possible because of the length of time it takes to do on those secondary things, then it's something officers can work on over PERDA, and that can be picked up by the new government. But when we know what we're dealing with, we'll be able to crack on with a proper communications mission now. Guidance will be extremely important part of that. And we had experience of that recently with the Renter Dwellings Licensing Scheme. And we should note in that though the public meetings and one-to-one advice that was provided through that went down very well, the guidance document itself didn't land well because there was a feeling it was presented in a confusing way. And we can learn the lessons from that and make sure we do a better job of it this time round. And if the Assembly approve this, I will look forward to that piece of work. Deputy Doublé asked about how this impact would be measured, and that goes to a scrutiny recommendation who are recommending that we commit to doing some sort of exercise on that. We already have things that will help us in doing that. The House Price Index quarterly review is part of that, and they have recently started catching statistics on rental properties bought and sold. We now are starting to get that data, which is helpful. But so as a result of this law, we will begin capturing data on rents charged. The Rent Tribunal will do an annual report, and all of that will help feed into that. And the law is future-proofed in that it has regulation-making abilities for this Assembly to change things if we think evidence is presented that things could be tweaked. But Deputy Doublé also asked about Middle Jersey and how this would affect them, people who don't themselves own rental properties. And the thing I would say to people who own a home and have children and are living an ordinary life in Jersey, what's the most important thing to those people? The most important thing above all else to those people will be their children. And it will be what they think the prospects of their children are to live happy and prosperous lives. And if Jersey does not provide the foundations from which people can live those decent and happy lives here in the form of a home which is affordable, secure and safe to them, we will not be able to blame anyone but ourselves for not realising why many of those children when they become adults will choose to leave in search of better lives elsewhere. Sir, I don't believe I should say much more on this. The only final point I wanted to make, sir, was to thank my team who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes on this, and I remain in absolute awe of their professionalism, commitment, and sheer intellect. They deserve medals for working with me, but in the absence of that, I certainly owe each of them a drink, and now that I've committed that to Hansard, there's no way I can back out of that. So I thank them very deeply for the work that they've done on this outstanding piece of work that will make a difference to the lives of people in Jersey. And so, sir, I commend this law in third reading and call for the
Can I have a point of clarification, please?
Yes, sir.
Clarification, yes.
Thank you, Minister, for answering my question. Just to ensure, because this law can be enacted by the order, did I understand correct that Minister needs to come back to the Assembly with the regulation and law will not be enacted by an order without coming back to the Assembly?
That's correct, so it wouldn't work without those regulations done first.
The appellant has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes.
You can't do that.
I ask the greffier to close the voting. announce that the law has been adopted in third reading. 31 votes for, 13 contra and 1 abstention.
So I think we've...
Do you want the numbers, the names? No?
Yes, sir, I think it's been a request for all
Yes.
of the vote.
Those members voting for, the Connétable St Helier, St Lawrence, St Bernard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Lehigera, Rob Ward, Gardner, Farnham, Mesick, Miles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Miller, Berry, Kovac, Andrews, Coles, Stevenson, Owls and Porre. Those members voting contre, the Connétable St Clement and Grouville, and Deputies Labby, Morel, Ayer, War, Scott, Rose Binet, Hal, Tom Binet, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Luce, and Deputy Gorst abstained.
The next item is the draft income support.
May I call for the adjournment, sir? No? No?
That one wasn't seconded. The next item is the draft income support parents, children and housing amendment regulations lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The main respondent is the chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. I ask the Greffier to read the citation.
Draft Income Support, Parents, Children and Housing Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 5 and 18 of the Income Support Jersey Law 2007.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I promise members this will be a lot more straightforward than the last item. Income support has been in administration since 2008, and since that time it has been evolving to keep up with the wide and varying range of people's circumstances. The changes proposed appear complex and technical, but in reality will simply ensure the law remains current and enable more efficient administration and appropriate data collection. The changes are not contentious and will have no negative impact on income support claimants. The addendum that I've provided sets out more clearly what the changes mean and has been shared to provide some extra background and context to members about what may happen in different circumstances. There are three main areas of change proposed. The first area deals with family units. The proposed regulations make the definition of family unit clearer. In general terms, a young person who lives with their parents will be included as part of the income support household of the parents until they are 25 years old. The regulation also proposes that entitlement to the single parent component is determined against the family unit instead of the household. This ensures the component can be awarded in cases where a young family member has their own claim. It ensures the single parents of young people with high care needs are treated the same as other single parents. These changes reflect current operational process. There will be no change in entitlement to income support claimants. The second area of change relates to the award of accommodation component. The proposed regulations will allow rent to be recognised for a parent or their son or daughter who is eligible for income support but not named on the lease or licence of the family dwelling. The proposals also amend the calculation of the amount of accommodation component payable when more than one household shares a dwelling to ensure income support is not over or underpaying in certain circumstances. The law drafter has taken the opportunity to tidy up this section of the regulations, so while the rates for all housing components available to income support households are part of the revised Schedule 1, there are no changes proposed to their values. These will be reviewed again as part of the annual review in January 2026 as usual. These changes in respect of the accommodation component reflect current operational processes. There will be no change of entitlements to income support claimants. The final area of change relates to the treatment of young people with earnings. The proposals aim to incentivise young people to work by ensuring they and their families will always be better off while they were earning. The changes reflect current operational process There will be no negative change in entitlement to income support claimants. There is a proposed amendment to the student earnings threshold to set it at the point the young person will be better off by having earnings disregarded in lieu of receiving income support components. A very small number of claims could be slightly better off as a result of these changes, but this is appropriate because the new threshold will ensure the student and their family are always better off by the young person working. In summary and before closing, these changes are required to ensure that the law remains current and to enable more efficient administration and appropriate data collection, which can be delivered as part of our wider Transform programme. Sarah, make the proposition.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Dubray, then Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, I wish to draw members' attention to my panel's comments on this proposition, and the panel is supportive of the proposition. But the Minister mentioned that they appeared complex and technical, and I can certainly agree with that. And I wanted to thank my officer and also the Minister's officers for the work that was done in helping us to fully understand the implications of this proposition so that we could issue these comments. And I just wanted to highlight two things that personally I feel are really notable. The young people, focusing on young people and encouraging them to be able to work. I think that's really important, isn't it, that their families are not impacted by that, and that was highlighted in the, I believe, in the CREA as well. So fully supportive of that, and also the single parents not being disadvantaged when they have a child who's receiving the care component. And this is actually, I think this is something that is going to make a huge change for people who are in that situation. And it might seem like it's small technical amendments today, but I think there will be a group of people in our island for whom this will have a huge, huge impact. Certainly for those single parents who are caring for children with disabilities or individual additional needs. And I'm sure that they'll be very grateful to the Minister for making these amendments. So yes, the panel is in support of all of the amendments within the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I've read both of these amendments with interest, and I agree with Deputy Dubray when she says that they are extraordinarily complicated. So I just have a couple of areas of clarification that I would appreciate if the Minister would address when she's summing up. The first one specifically refers to young people in full-time education and working. Does this now apply to distance learning students who now get maintenance grants? I would like to know how income support will treat them compared to students who are off-island in full-time education. And have the distance learning students been considered at all in this amendment? Will they also have a work requirement because their study is not necessarily full-time? And if there is a work requirement, how will those hours of study be apportioned against the maintenance grant for income support claims and hours of work? And I'd also like to know whether the work disregard, if the work disregard will be applied if students are studying for a key skills course. Moving to example 5 in the regulations, and I appreciate these are technical issues, but I think they're important questions. While I understand why the Minister is changing this, might it have unintended consequences? Students who remain off-island during their uni holidays seem to me will get to keep all of their income, but if they come back to Jersey to work, they won't. And I'd like some clarification on that. The other clarification is something that I have raised in the Assembly before, and that is the issue of adult children who are on income support living with their parents in households who are not income support households. And I refer specifically to young adults who may have autism or severe learning disabilities, who currently are not entitled to a housing component. And I've read and reread this, and whereas I can see it applies where parents are on income support, I can't see that it applies if they're not. So my final question, will these changes regarding family units and households be applied automatically by her department, or will the claimants need to make a new claim in order to benefit from any changes? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the principles? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to take this opportunity actually to thank the scrutiny panel for its report and its work over the summer recess to understand this change in legislation and see that actually what we're doing is fairly straightforward tidying up exercise. In relation to the questions that the Deputy asked in relation to distance learning and very specific things. Firstly, that there isn't a requirement to work within this legislation. What we're saying is people who, it is encouraging young people to work and enabling them to be better off when they do that. With regard to young adults that aren't entitled within a household. Some of this, again, we try and treat people as we give them the best option that is going to work for their household in order to give the better entitlement, and that is the intention of this particular change in legislation. I'm always hesitant to give advice on specific circumstances on the floor of the chamber because it is really important. And I know some of these questions have actually been raised by the student loan support group as well. And the advice I always give to them is that people should contact the department in relation to their specific circumstance in order to get the correct advice in relation to their circumstance. But the changes to students apply to students in full-time education, including that on and off island. And students in receipt of the grants will only, sorry, I'm just reading my notes here, will only be considered for being in the household when they're not eligible for the grant. So they either get the grant or they get their income support, if that makes sense. But I'm happy to speak with the Deputy about any further areas or any specific cases that she's concerned about. But I would like to give assurance to everybody that this is about putting into law what is common and custom practice within the department. This is about ensuring that people are always treated in the best and most appropriate way. And this is about efficiency and effectiveness and ensuring that we can do things as quickly as possible. Just to answer, I know there was another question around automatic. Of course, whenever anybody's situation changes, they need to inform the department of their change in circumstances. We don't have automated processes within government departments where, say, for example, sites would let us know when somebody becomes a student. So I really must remind people that when their circumstances change, and that may have an impact on their eligibility for income support, they do need to contact the department in order to get the right advice. I think that answers the questions, sir, so I will call for the appel.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. Ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the principles have been adopted unanimously, 45 votes for. Dr. Dublé, does your panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Minister, how do you propose the regulations in second reading?
En bloc, please, sir.
Are the regulations seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the regulations in second reading? All those in favour kindly show. Thank you very much. Those against? The regulations are adopted in second reading. Minister, do you wish to propose the matter in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Is the matter seconded in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the regulations as adopted in third reading? Is the appel called for? In that case, all those in favour kindly show.
Appel, please, sir.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I invite the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the regulations have been adopted unanimously in third reading, 45 votes for. The final item is Jersey Employment and Discrimination Tribunal, appointment of members, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The main respondent is the chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to appoint, in accordance with the Employment and Discrimination Tribunal Jersey Regulations 2014, the following persons as members of the Jersey Employment and Discrimination Tribunal for a period of 5 years. Employee panel lay members: Alison Brown, James Thompson, Gregor Lukowski, Robert Douglas. Employer panel lay members: James Lambert, Josephine Scott, Lisa Payne, Simon Saul. Discrimination panel lay members: Pioneni Colville, Roderick Chatikobo, Sabrina Stewart, Wali-ul-Islam.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I am pleased to seek the approval of the Assembly to the appointment of 12 new lay members to the Jersey Employment and Discrimination Tribunal. What is particularly encouraging, as members will see from my report, is the breadth of experience and interests of the new appointees, reflecting a wide cross-section of the community in Jersey. If the proposition is agreed to, the appointments will take effect once the new members have taken the oath before the Royal Court. I am satisfied that the recruitment process undertaken with the participation of the Jersey Appoints Commission was carried out in a fair and transparent way. Sir, I make the proposition.
Thank you, Minister. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member speak on the proposition? Yes, Tadier.
So I speak partly with my chair of the Jersey Human Rights Group, not necessarily something directly related to this assembly, sir, but we know that in Jersey issues of discrimination still have a long way to go. I noticed in today's JEP that there was another case of somebody who faced discrimination in a pub. I think the pub was in St Martin, and that they were not served, and it turns out that they had a particular condition which the server didn't know, and they won their tribunal and were awarded, it's been reported, a sum of £2,500. And I think on top of the story that was run yesterday, and that has been raised with the here with the Minister, and I think it's absolutely right that on occasions we do bring these cases to the attention of government, because especially where there are companies running monopolies on behalf of government for key infrastructure in the island, that actually it's really important that we have a tribunal that can make impartial and measured decisions on these things. And from what it looks like in front of us, with that balance of both lay members from employers, employees, but also discrimination panel lay members, that we should be able to get to hopefully a position. What I would emphasise, though, sir, I had a conversation outside of the Assembly, is that so many of these cases simply don't come to the tribunal anyway, because members of the public who have faced discrimination in all sorts of ways, we talked about disability discrimination, even when there's been a tangible and obvious bad practice, intentionally or otherwise, those on the receiving end of that so often don't want to make a fuss. They often say, we simply want to make sure that this kind of behaviour doesn't happen again. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that when these, and of course that's a matter for them. I think ultimately we do need cases to come forward to go to tribunal, not just to set precedents, but also to make sure that there's some kind of justice and retribution. But we can't enforce individuals to do that, sir. So I do, of course, congratulate the Minister for bringing this forward and putting together, not herself, but the process seems to have solicited responses from a diverse background, sir. And I hope that actually, I wish the panel all the best in their difficult deliberations, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Doublé.
Two very brief points. First of all, to thank the Minister for the level of detail, which helps us to understand that there is diversity amongst these appointments, which is very helpful. Secondly, members will see in the financial and staffing implications, it's stated as none because the remuneration comes from the budget of the judicial greffier. I did look into this, and the fees are, I believe, £800 a day for the chair and vice chair posts, £300 a day for lay members. It would be helpful if this information could be included in future appointment propositions, because I think it's important that the Assembly is aware of that at the time of lodging. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. Like Deputy Tadier, I also do hope that more people take the opportunity to take cases where there are genuine cases that need to be heard to the tribunal and use that service as appropriate. Yes, to Deputy Doublé, thank you for your support there, and I will ask officers in the future to include that information, because I think it is useful for members to know that there is that remuneration as well. So, sir, I close and call for the appel.
Thank you, Minister. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been adopted unanimously. 44 votes for. That concludes public business for this meeting. I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. There are a couple of changes from the listing of public business as shown on the consolidated order paper. Members will recall that the Minister for the Environment deferred P53 draft sea fisheries minimum size limits from this meeting to the next, and that has therefore been added to the list for the meeting of the 30th of September. Deputy Miles has advised that her two propositions, P67, Le Kennevet Parade and Precinct, and P68, vacant commercial properties, will be listed for the meeting on the 21st of October, and they will not therefore be debated next time. Finally, the draft competition amendment law, which was lodged yesterday, P69, is listed for the meeting on the 11th of November. Looking at the amount of business for the next meeting, I do not anticipate it to be lasting as long as this week, but I would advise members to be mindful of the continuation days and try to make themselves available. Therefore, I propose the business, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Members content to proceed as recommended by the Chair of PPC? And members now content to adjourn. The States stands adjourned until 9:30 on Tuesday, the 30th of September.